ថាកាសិកជាកិច្ចបន្ទាប់នាងខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអនុញ្ញាតជម្រាបជូននៅកម្មវិធីថ្ងៃនេះមានដូចតទៅ1ប្រកាសគណៈអធិបតីនិងភ្ញៀវកិត្តិយសដែលបានអញ្ជើញចូលរួម2គោរពភ្លេងជាតិនិងនៃប្រជាជាតិកម្ពុជា3ថ្លែងសន្ទរកថាថ្លែងសន្ទរកថាស្វាគមន៍ដោយឯកឧត្តមច័ន្ទសរុតអនុរដ្ឋលេខាធិការក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទនិងជាប្រធានគណៈកម្មការប្រតិបត្តិនៃសម្ព័ន្ធកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនៃប្រពលកម្មនិរន្តរភាពកម្ពុជាថ្លែងសន្និដ្ឋានថាបើកកម្មវិធីដោយលោកជំទាវ អាស៊ីគីនអនុរដ្ឋលេខាធិការក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទ5សម្រាប់អាហារសម្រន់និងថតរូបអនុស្សាវរីយ៍ទី6ការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញពីទូនាទីចម្បងនៃកាបូនសរីរាង្គដីនិងផលប៉ះពាល់នៃការធ្វើកសិកម្មដោយលោកបណ្ឌិត Rémi Cardinael អញ្ជើញមកពីវេជ្ជមណ្ឌលស្រាវជ្រាវបារាំង CIRAD 7ការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញស្ដីពីស្ថានភាពនៃការប្រើប្រាស់ដីកសិកម្មនិងកាបូនសរីរាង្គដីគំនិតផ្ដួចផ្ដើមផ្សេងៗដើម្បីរក្សានិងបង្កើតកាបូនសរីរាង្គដីដោយលោកបណ្ឌិត SENG Vang ប្រធាននាយកដ្ឋានគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានដីកសិកម្ម8ការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញពីស្ថានភាពដីនៃការបំភាយឧស្ម័នផ្ទះកញ្ចក់និងករណីសិក្សាមកពីកអនុវត្តនៅលើ La Réunion ដោយលោកបណ្ឌិត Laurent Thuriès អញ្ជើញមកពីមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលស្រាវជ្រាវបារាំង CIRAD 9ការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញពីយុទ្ធសាស្ត្ររយៈពេលវែងសម្រាប់អព្យាក្រឹតភាពកាបូនដោយលោកស្រីបណ្ឌិត Niina Kylliainen ទីប្រឹក្សាបច្ចេកទេសអង្គការ UNDP និងក្រសួងបរិស្ថាន10ការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញពីក្របខ័ណ្ឌច្បាប់សម្រាប់ការអនុវត្តមាត្រា6នៃកិច្ចព្រមព្រៀងទីក្រុងប៉ារីសដោយលោក Stephan Gill មន្ត្រីជាន់ខ្ពស់អង្គការ CGGI 11មតិបិទកម្មវិធីដោយលោកស្រី Ophélie Bouvis នាយកទីភ្នាក់ងារបារាំងដើម្បីការអភិវឌ្ឍ12ការសម្រាកអាហារពេលថ្ងៃត្រង់នាងខ្ញុំសូមអនុញ្ញាតចាប់ផ្ដើមកម្មវិធីជាបឋមនាងខ្ញុំសូមគោរពនាងខ្ញុំមានការចូលកម្មវិធីថ្ងៃនេះផងដែរមានការចូលរួមដ៏ខ្ពង់ខ្ពស់ពីឯកឧត្តមលោកជំទាវអនុរដ្ឋលេខាធិការក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទឯកឧត្តមអគ្គលេខាធិការក្រមប្រឹក្សាកសិកម្មនិងអភិវឌ្ឍជនបទនិងសមាជិកានៃដៃគូអភិវឌ្ឍអង្គភាពពាក់ព័ន្ធជាតិនិងអន្តរជាតិសរុបសិក្ខាកាមចំនួន60នាក់ជាបន្តនាងខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញគណៈអធិបតីឯកឧត្តមលោកជំទាវលោកស្រីភ្ញៀវកិត្តិយសជាតិនិងអន្តរជាតិមេត្តាក្រោកឈរឡើងដើម្បីគោរពភ្លេងជាតិនៃប្រជាណាចក្រកម្ពុជាគោរពសូមអរគុណនិងសូមសម្រួលមេត្តាអរិយាបថកម្មវិធីបន្តនាងខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញឯកឧត្តមច័ន្ទសរុតរដ្ឋអនុរដ្ឋលេខាធិការក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទប្រធានគណៈកម្មការប្រតិបត្តិនៃសម្ព័ន្ធកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនិងពល បដកម្មនៅរដ្ឋាភិបាលកម្ពុជាឡើងថ្លែងសន្និដ្ឋានស្វាគមន៍សូមគោរពអញ្ជើញ
Good morning, all the delegates and the participants. Dr. Asikin, Undersecretary of State, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, and Vice Chair of the Cambodia Conservation Agriculture and Sustainable Intensification Consortium. Madam Ophelie Boris, Country Director of the French Agency for Development in Cambodia. Excellencies, Lokum Tio, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Executive Board Committee of the Cambodia Conservation Agriculture and Sustainable Intensification Consortium, and on my own behalf, I would like to express my gratitude and welcome to Her Excellency Asikin for presiding over the event on soil organic carbon and greenhouse gas emission status, possible pathway toward regenerative agriculture in Cambodia today. This event is the first time that the Research and Development Subcommittee of the Cambodia Conservation Agriculture and Sustainable Intensification Consortium, under the lead of the Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Land Resource Management, has worked closely with the CIRAD, Swisscontact, and relevant partners. I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the Department of Agricultural Land Resource Management of the General Directorate of Agriculture for co-organizing this event under support and facilitation of the Cambodia Conservation Agriculture Sustainable Intensification Consortium. And thank you for the presence of Excellencies, Lokum Tio, ladies and gentlemen who are participated here. Excellency, Lokum Tio, ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this event is to share experiences related to the importance of soil organic matter and the effect of climate change caused by greenhouse gas for the benefit to regenerative agriculture in Cambodia. Once again, on behalf of the Executive Board Committee of the Cambodia Conservation Agriculture and Sustainable Intensification Consortium and myself, I would like to express my gratitude and best wishes to Her Excellency Asikin, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, with good health, strong energy, wisdom, and success. Thank you.
សូមអរគុណឯកឧត្តមច័ន្ទសរុតចំពោះមតិស្វាគមន៍ជាកិច្ចបន្តនាងខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញលោកជំទាវយ៉ាអាក់ស៊ីគីនអនុរដ្ឋលេខាធិការក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទនិងជាអនុប្រធានគណៈកម្មការតម្រង់ទិសរបស់សម្ព័ន្ធកាសិកជាតំណាងឯកឧត្តមអោមកំសៀនរដ្ឋលេខាធិការក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទឡើងថ្លែងសន្ទរកថាបើកម្មវិធីសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញ
So, very good morning, Excellency Dr. Chan Phaluen, Undersecretary of State, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, His Excellency Chan Saruth, Undersecretary of State and Chair of the CASIC Executive Board, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, His Excellency Ki Kosal, Undersecretary of State, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, His Excellency Soxilo, Secretary General of CARDI, Ms. Ophelie Boris, representative of the French Agency for Development in Cambodia, AFD, Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. I am pleased and honored to address the opening remarks to this event on soil organic carbon and greenhouse gas emission status, possible pathways toward regenerative agriculture in Cambodia. I express my gratitude to the Cambodia Conservation, Agriculture and Sustainable Intensification Consortium, CASIC, and especially to the Research for the Development Subcommittee that is led by the Department of Agricultural Land Research, Management, CARDI, and CIRAD. This event is organized under the support from the project entitled Agroecology and Safe Food Systems Transition in Southeast Asia that is funded by the French Agency for the Development AFD, the European Union EU, the French Facility for Global Environment FFEM, and by the Project of Innovation for Sustainable Agriculture funded by the Swiss Development Cooperation and Hak Mao Foundation. A special thanks to Swisscontact and CIRAD for their continued support to CASIC. Also, I am very pleased to see the participation of different ministry lines, which is key to share the same understanding of these topics of soil organic carbon and the production of ecosystem services and identifying the support and are needed for farmers to transition to agroecological farming system. Looking to His Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, to begin with, the diversity of presentation will give us one, an overview of ongoing initiatives in agroecology and conservation agriculture in the country. Two, the key role of soil carbon to sustain agricultural production. Three, level of greenhouse gas emission for different farming systems. Four, long-term strategy for neutrality for Cambodia, and 5, regulations that are designed to implement the national determined contribution that Cambodia has updated in 2020 and connection with international markets for carbon and ecosystem services. However, Cambodia has undergone a rapid transformation from forest cover to agricultural lands, driven by high market demands. Rapid land conversion has had served negative impact on the remaining forest cover, biodiversity, and soil quality. Climate change also significantly affected Cambodia's agricultural sector and put food security and livelihoods at risk. In future climate conditions for a period of 2025 to 2050, most agricultural lands area are likely to be at high exposed risk to drought. Smallholder farmers are particularly vulnerable to climate change risk given their dependence on rainfalls and volatile crop yields, with a single crop being at particular high risk to crop failure. Restoring soils as well as conserving water, preserving soil biodiversity are among the most needed requirements to advance farm sustainability and contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation. Our soils need to be valued for their productive capacities as well as the contribution to food security, maintenance of key ecosystem services, and well-being of rural communities. Farmers need to be incentivized for their investment in soil conservation, producing ecosystem services, and public good. Ladies and gentlemen, reflecting on these challenges and in line with the ASEAN Vision Strategic Plan for Food, Agriculture, and Forest 2016 to 2025, the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, MAFF, has engaged into the promotion of sustainable agricultural production and safer food systems. In addition, the Royal Government of Cambodia is committed to join hand in hand with the international community, such as combating land degradation under UNFCCC's framework through the National Action Plan NAP to combat land degradation from 2018 to 2027 and land degradation neutrality targets in 2018. Restoring the biodiversity through the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan and BSAPs, adapting and mitigating the climate change through the ratification of Paris Agreement and joining the 4/1000 initiatives. Implementing the National Strategic Plan on Green Growth from 2013 to 2030, the Cambodia Climate Change Strategic Plan from 2014 to 2023, the update Cambodia nationally determines contribution NDC, and lastly, transforming food systems through agroecology, joining a coalition for the transformation of food systems through agroecology within the framework of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, MAFF, has engaged in more than a decade in conservation agriculture and more recently in agroecology, dynamic that both refer to regenerative farming. That represents the most relevant topics responding to the above challenges: preserving the soil fertility, increasing soil organic matter, retaining more water in field, and increasing nutrient availability by utilizing crop residues, cover crops, and keeps these residues as a mulch. A range of initiatives are ongoing to institutionalize this dynamic. For instance, in terms of skill reinforcement and capacity building, MAFF will support the General Directorate of Agriculture, GDA, to upgrade one of the main experimental stations at so-called the Boknao CA Research Center as a national and regional center for excellence for agriculture, for conservation agriculture, CA, sustainable intensification and agroecology due to its legacy with the longest CA experiments and demonstrations in the regions. A 5-year strategic plan from 2022 to 2026 has been finalized, and GDA expects that our development partners will join us to reach our goal. Next, CA, the sustainable intensification, are integrated into curriculum of the universities to build capacity of a new generation of lecturers, scientists, and agronomists. The Royal University of Agriculture, RUA, has implemented the Center of Excellence on Sustainable Agricultural Intensification and Nutrition, CESANS, aiming at strengthening the research capacities and education in the field of sustainable intensification. Third, following skill reinforcement and higher education, the Department of Extension of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, MAFF, also with the Provincial Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, implements an extension model called MAFF, aiming at engaging the private sector into a transition to conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification. Last but not least, a rewarding mechanism based on ecosystem service production called DAIMIA for golden soil will be implemented, rewarding farmers who will transition to conservation agriculture and agroecology. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a sincere note of gratitude to all the speakers for investing your precious time, the French Agency for Development, all ministerial representatives, colleagues and partners who are dedicated their time to organize this event and participation. I have no doubt that we will continue to work together hand in hand with different ministry lines, development partners to reach our common goal to foster the dissemination of agroecology and regenerative farming system. To end of my speech, I would like to wish all Excellency distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all the best of luck and stay safe from COVID-19. I would like to declare the event open. Thank you very much.
សូមអរគុណលោកជំទាវយ៉ាអេស៊ីគិនចំពោះមតិបើកកម្មវិធីជាកិច្ចបន្ទាប់ខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញឯកឧត្តមលោកជំទាវលោកស្រីអ្នកនាងកញ្ញាភ្ញៀវជាតិនិងអន្តរជាតិទាំងអស់អញ្ជើញសម្រាប់10នាទីសម្រាប់អាហារសម្រន់សូមជម្រាបផងដែរថាយើងនឹងមានការផ្សាយនៅវីដេអូចំនួន2ដែលវីដេអូទី1ស្ដីអំពីដីសម្រាប់សន្តិសុខស្បៀងនិងអាកាសធាតុនិងវីដេអូទី2ស្ដីអំពីប្រវត្តិនៃការបង្កើតសម្ព័ន្ធកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនិងនិរន្តរភាពប្រពលវប្បកម្មកម្ពុជាសម្រាប់ភ្ញៀវកិត្តិយសអាចទស្សនាស្របពេលនៃការពិសាអាហារសម្រន់យើងនឹងត្រឡប់មកវិញជាមួយនឹងការថតរូបជុំក្រុមនិងចាប់ផ្ដើមកម្មវិធីនៅវេលាម៉ោង 9:17 នាទីសូមអរគុណសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញភ្ញៀវកិត្តិយសអញ្ជើញឡើងមកខាងមុខដើម្បីធ្វើការថតរូបអនុស្សាវរីយ៍ជាក្រុមសូមអរគុណសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញភ្ញៀវជាតិភ្ញៀវអន្តរជាតិអញ្ជើញឡើងមកលើវេទិកាដើម្បីថតរូបអនុស្សាវរីយ៍សូមគោរពអញ្ជើញ
វេទិកាថ្នាក់ជាតិដែលត្រូវបានបង្ការក្នុងវិស័យកសិកម្មអភិរក្សប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពនិងកសិអេកូឡូស៊ីនៅកម្ពុជាយើងអាចក្រឡេកមើលគំនិតផ្ដួចផ្ដើមនានាតាំងពីឆ្នាំ2004ដែលត្រួសត្រាយផ្លូវសម្រាប់កសិកម្មអភិរក្សប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្ម
ដីសម្រាប់សន្តិសុខស្បៀងនិងអាកាសធាតុសកម្មភាពមនុស្សបានបញ្ចេញបរិមាណដ៏ច្រើនសន្ធឹកសន្ធាប់នៃកាបូនឌីអុកស៊ីតទៅក្នុងបរិយាកាសវាបានបង្កើនផលប៉ះពាល់បង្កឡើងដោយឧស្ម័នផ្ទះកញ្ចក់និងជំរុញឲ្យមានការប្រែប្រួលអាកាសធាតុកាន់តែខ្លាំងឡើងជារៀងរាល់ឆ្នាំរុក្ខជាតិស្រូបយកប្រមាណ 30% នៃឧស្ម័នកាបូនិកតាមរយៈដំណើរការនៃការធ្វើរស្មីសំយោគក្រោយមកនៅពេលដែលរុក្ខជាតិទាំងនោះងាប់និងពុកផុយភាវៈរស់មានជីវិតដែលរស់នៅក្នុងដីដូចជាបាក់តេរីផ្សិតនិងចន្លេនបំលែងរុក្ខជាតិទាំងនោះឲ្យคล้ายទៅជាសារធាតុសរីរាង្គសារធាតុសរីរាង្គដែលសម្បូរទៅដោយកាបូននេះមានសារៈសំខាន់យ៉ាងខ្លាំងសម្រាប់ចំណីអាហាររបស់មនុស្សពីព្រោះវាផ្ទុកនៅទឹកអាសូតនិងផូស្វ័រដែលជាប្រភពសារធាតុចិញ្ចឹមដែលចាំបាច់សម្រាប់ទ្រទ្រង់ការលូតលាស់របស់រុក្ខជាតិដីនៅលើពិភពលោកផ្ទុកកាបូនពី2ទៅ3ដងច្រើនជាងបរិយាកាសការបង្កើនការស្តុកទុកកាបូនដោយបង្កើនបរិមាណ 0.4% ក្នុងមួយឆ្នាំឬ 4/1000 នៅស្រទាប់30ទៅ40សង់ទីម៉ែត្រនៃផ្ទៃខាងលើរបស់ដីអាចបញ្ឈប់ការកើនឡើងកាបូនឌីអុកស៊ីតនៅក្នុងបរិយាកាសនេះជាសំណើនៃគំនិតផ្ដួចផ្ដើម 4/1000 នៃដីសម្រាប់សន្តិសុខស្បៀងនិងការប្រែប្រួលអាកាសធាតុដូច្នេះការបង្កើនការស្តុកទុកកាបូនក្នុងដីនឹងរួមចំណែកដោយមិនត្រឹមតែរក្សាលំនឹងអាកាសធាតុតែថែមទាំងធានាបាននៅសន្តិសុខស្បៀងដែលអាចផ្គត់ផ្គង់ចំណីអាហារបានគ្រប់គ្រាន់សម្រាប់មនុស្សគ្រប់រូបតើយើងត្រូវអនុវត្តដោយរបៀបណាគោលនយោបាយចាំបាច់នានាត្រូវតែបង្កើនឡើងដើម្បីកាត់បន្ថយការកាប់បំផ្លាញព្រៃឈើនិងជំរុញឲ្យមានការអនុវត្តកសិកម្មអេកូឡូស៊ីដែលបង្កើនបរិមាណសារធាតុសរីរាង្គក្នុងដីនិងដើម្បីសម្រេចឲ្យបានជារៀងរាល់ឆ្នាំនៅកម្មវត្ថុ 4/1000 ឧទាហរណ៍ដូចជាជៀសវាងការទុកដីចោលដោយគ្មានគម្របដើម្បីកម្រិតការបាត់បង់កាបូនដាំដំណាំនិងវាលស្មៅឡើងវិញក្នុងតំបន់ព្រៃសឹករិចរិលដាំដើមឈើនិងរុក្ខជាតិអំបូរសណ្ដែកដែលមានសមត្ថភាពចាប់យកអាសូតពីបរិយាកាសទៅស្តុកទុកនៅក្នុងដីប្រើប្រាស់ជីលាមកសត្វឬជីកំប៉ុស្តដើម្បីបំពេញសុខភាពដីឬបង្កើនការស្តុកទុកទឹកនៅផ្នែកខាងក្រោមរបស់រុក្ខជាតិតើនរណាជាគោលដៅនៅលើពិភពលោកមានកសិដ្ឋានប្រមាណ570លាននិងមានមនុស្សលើសពី 3000 លាននាក់កំពុងរស់នៅជនបទដែលអាចអនុវត្តបច្ចេកទេសទាំងនេះបាននៅក្នុងទំហំចំណាយប៉ុន្មានដើម្បីស្ដារឡើងវិញនៅដីកសិកម្មទាមទាររាប់សិបដុល្លារក្នុង1ហិកតាខណៈដែលកសិរុក្ខកម្មនិងការស្ដារឡើងវិញនៅព្រៃទាំងអស់ទាមទារការវិនិយោគជាច្រើនហើយត្រូវប្រើរយៈពេលប៉ុន្មានការស្តុកទុកកាបូនក្នុងដីត្រូវបន្តរយៈពេលពី20ទៅ30ឆ្នាំក្រោយពេលដែលបច្ចេកទេសកសិកម្មល្អៗត្រូវបានចាប់ផ្ដើមអនុវត្តជាប្រចាំក្រោមគំនិតដូចផ្ដើម 4/1000 ការស្រាវជ្រាវទៅធ្វើឡើងព្រមគ្នាជាបន្តបន្ទាប់ជាមួយកសិករសហគមន៍អ្នកសេដ្ឋកិច្ចវិទូនានាដែលពាក់ព័ន្ធក្នុងកម្រិតប្រទេសនិងតំបន់ដើម្បីគោលបំណងសន្តិសុខស្បៀងនិងអាកាសធាតុ
សម្ព័ន្ធកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនិងប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពកម្ពុជាឬហៅកាត់ថា CASIC គឺជាវេទិកាថ្នាក់ជាតិដែលត្រូវបានបង្កើតឡើងជាផ្លូវការនៅខែឧសភាឆ្នាំ2020តាមរយៈសេចក្តីសម្រេចដ៏ខ្ពង់ខ្ពស់របស់អាយដាមវែងសាខុនរដ្ឋមន្ត្រីក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទគឺជាវេទិកាសម្របសម្រួលសម្រាប់សមាជិកដែលកំពុងធ្វើការក្នុងវិស័យកសិកម្មអភិរក្សប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពនិងកសិអេកូឡូស៊ីនៅកម្ពុជាយើងអាចក្រឡេកមើលគំនិតពុយផ្ដាំនានាតាំងពីឆ្នាំ2004ដែលត្រួតត្រាយផ្លូវសម្រាប់កសិកម្មអភិរក្សប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពនិងកសិអេកូឡូស៊ីនៅកម្ពុជាក្នុងឆ្នាំ2004តាមរយៈគម្រោងអភិវឌ្ឍកៅស៊ូខ្នាតតូចនៃនាយកដ្ឋានកៅស៊ូនៃក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទបានធ្វើតេស្តសាកល្បងលើប្រព័ន្ធផលិតកម្មផ្អែកលើវិធីសាស្ត្រកសិកម្មអភិរក្សក្នុងឆ្នាំ2008កសិកម្មអភិរក្សត្រូវបានអនុវត្តដោយអគ្គនាយកដ្ឋានកសិកម្មក្នុងគម្រោងបាដាក់ក្នុងឆ្នាំ2009មានការធ្វើពិសោធន៍រយៈពេលវែងទៅលើការស្រាវជ្រាវដីកាបូនសរីរាង្គក្នុងគម្រោងសកម្មភាពកសិអេកូឡូស៊ីពហុប្រទេសនៅស្ថានីយ៍បោះខ្នោក្នុងឆ្នាំ2010មានសកម្មភាពអនុវត្តកសិកម្មអភិរក្សផ្សេងៗទៀតតាមរយៈកម្មវិធីគ្រប់គ្រងកសិកម្មនិងធម្មជាតិប្រកបដោយនិរន្តរភាពក្នុងឆ្នាំ2014គម្រោងបាដាក់បានផ្លាស់ប្ដូរទៅជាមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលសេវាកម្មកសិកម្មអភិរក្សហើយជាអង្គភាពមួយរបស់នាយកដ្ឋានគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានដីកសិកម្មក្នុងឆ្នាំ2016អគ្គនាយកដ្ឋានកសិកម្មបានប្រគល់ដីទំហំ 14.5 ហិកតាដែលស្ថិតក្នុងស្រុកចំការលើខេត្តកំពង់ចាមដល់នាយកដ្ឋានគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានដីកសិកម្មចាប់ពីពេលនោះមកផ្ទៃដីនេះត្រូវបានគេស្គាល់ថាជាស្ថានីយ៍ស្រាវជ្រាវកសិកម្មអភិរក្សបោះខ្នោនៅឆ្នាំ2016នេះដែរមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលឧត្តមភាពប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពនិងអាហារូបត្ថម្ភឬហៅកាត់ថាស៊ីសេនត្រូវបានបង្កើតឡើងតាមរយៈការគ្រប់គ្រងពីមន្ទីរពិសោធន៍នវានុវត្តន៍ប្រកបដោយនិរន្តរភាពក្នុងគោលបំណងពង្រីកកសិកម្មអភិរក្សប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពក្នុងប្រព័ន្ធអេកូឡូស៊ីផ្សេងៗទៀតក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាក្នុងពេលនេះដែរនៅមានគំនិតព្រួយផ្ដើមនិងគម្រោងផ្សេងៗទៀតដូចជាគម្រោងដំណើរការផ្លាស់ប្ដូរកសិអេកូឡូស៊ីនៅអាស៊ីអាគ្នេយ៍និងគម្រោងប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មអេកូឡូស៊ីនិងសេវាកម្មនៃប្រព័ន្ធអេកូឡូស៊ីដីនៅឆ្នាំ2018និងឆ្នាំ2019ក៏មានការរៀបចំសិក្ខាសាលានិងវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលថ្នាក់តំបន់ក្រោមប្រធានបទយន្តតូបនីយកម្មក្នុងកសិកម្មអភិរក្សដែលមានការគាំទ្រចូលរួមពី18ប្រទេសក្នុងតំបន់អាស៊ីប៉ាស៊ីហ្វិកនៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2018នេះដែរគម្រោងសេវាកម្មកសិកម្មអភិរក្សដោយកម្រៃត្រូវបានបង្កើតនិងអនុវត្តរួមគ្នាដោយនាយកដ្ឋានវិស្វកម្មកសិកម្មនាយកដ្ឋានគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានដីកសិកម្មស៊ីសេន CIRAD កម្មវិធីកំណើនដោយបរិយាបន្ននិងនវានុវត្តន៍នៅតំបន់ទន្លេមេគង្គមីហ្គីបរបស់អង្គការ Swisscontact ក្នុងឆ្នាំ2018គំនិតនៃការបង្កើតសម្ព័ន្ធ CASIC ក៏បានព្រួយផ្ដើមឡើងក្នុងឆ្នាំ2020 CASIC ត្រូវបានបង្កើតជាផ្លូវការក្រោមក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទគំនិតព្រួយផ្ដើមឬគម្រោងផ្សេងៗបានរៀបរាប់ខាងលើគឺទទួលបានការគាំទ្រពីទីភ្នាក់ងារបារាំងសម្រាប់ការអភិវឌ្ឍ AFD ទីភ្នាក់ងារជំនួយអាមេរិក USAID ទីភ្នាក់ងារស្វីសសម្រាប់ការអភិវឌ្ឍនិងកិច្ចសហប្រតិបត្តិការអន្តរជាតិ SDC និងដៃគូអភិវឌ្ឍន៍ដទៃទៀតបន្ទាប់ពីការបង្កើតនិងការដាក់ដំណើរការជាផ្លូវការ CASIC បានចាប់ផ្ដើមបង្កើតផែនការការងាររបស់ខ្លួនសម្រាប់ឆ្នាំ2020និង2021លទ្ធផលសម្រាប់សំខាន់នៃសកម្មភាពទាំងនោះរួមមានការបង្កើតនិមិត្តសញ្ញាសម្ភារៈផ្សព្វផ្សាយផ្សេងៗដូចជា logo ខិត្តប័ណ្ណកញ្ចប់ព័ត៌មានដែលទាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនិងប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពការបង្កើតឲ្យមានជាវេទិកាទំនាក់ទំនងបែប digital ដូចជាគេហទំព័រនិងទំព័រ Facebook ជាដើមការបង្កើតការិយាល័យ CASIC នៅក្នុងក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទដែលនេះបង្ហាញពីការគាំទ្រនិងជំនឿយ៉ាងរឹងមាំរបស់ក្រសួងចំពោះសម្ព័ន្ធ CASIC ការបង្កើតឲ្យមានជាការរៀបចំប្រជុំប្រចាំខែរបស់គណៈកម្មការប្រតិបត្តិប្រជុំប្រចាំឈុំមាសរបស់គណៈកម្មការតម្រឹងទិសនិងការរៀបចំប្រជុំប្រចាំឆ្នាំរបស់សម្ព័ន្ធ CASIC ការរៀបចំឲ្យមានជាដំណើរទស្សនាទៅតំបន់កំពុងអនុវត្តកសិកម្មអភិរក្សសម្រាប់សមាជិករបស់ CASIC ដែលគូអភិវឌ្ឍនិងក្រុមហ៊ុនឯកជននានាការពង្រីកសមាជិកភាពរបស់អនុគណៈកម្មការទាំង4ជាមួយនឹងស្ថាប័នពាក់ព័ន្ធនានាការចុះហត្ថលេខាលើកិច្ចព្រមព្រៀងជាដៃគូជាមួយ CISEN, Swisscontact និង CIRAD ការរៀបចំឲ្យមានសិក្ខាសាលាផ្សេងៗគ្នាដើម្បីពិគ្រោះយោបល់និងប្រមូលធាតុចូលសម្រាប់ការបង្កើតផែនទីបង្ហាញផ្លូវរបស់ CASIC រយៈពេល5ឆ្នាំសម្រាប់ឆ្នាំ2022ដល់2026 ផែនទីបង្ហាញផ្លូវរបស់ CASIC បានផ្ដោតលើគោលបំណងយុទ្ធសាស្ត្រធំៗចំនួន3 1. ពង្រឹង CASIC និងសម្របសម្រួលភាគីពាក់ព័ន្ធ 2. ពង្រឹងចំណេះដឹងនិងការស្រាវជ្រាវលើកសិកម្មអភិរក្សប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពនិងកសិអេកូឡូស៊ី 3. ធ្វើឲ្យប្រសើរឡើងនិងពង្រីកការអនុវត្តនិងសេវាកម្មកសិកម្មអភិរក្សប្រព័ន្ធបព្វកម្មនិរន្តរភាពនិងកសិអេកូឡូស៊ី ផែនទីបង្ហាញផ្លូវរបស់ CASIC កំពុងតែបានចូលរួមចំណែកក្នុងការអនុវត្តផែនការជាតិផងដែរដូចជាសកម្មភាពជាតិដើម្បីប្រយុទ្ធប្រឆាំងការរិចរឹលដីនិងការរួមចំណែករបស់កម្ពុជាជាដើម CASIC នឹងបដិញ្ញាក្នុងការអនុវត្តផែនការរបស់ខ្លួនស្របទៅតាមផែនទីបង្ហាញផ្លូវនាពេលនេះនិងនៅពេលអនាគត
Hello.
Ninh khiêm xông cột bánh chơi ai ở đám lục trùng tiêu lục sấy nẹn niên cả nhà nhiều chết nâng an trả chết anh chơi xâm ru ở dạy bọt đám bay bắn tao nơi cam vị thị bắn tọa chết thay mà đom tiết Ninh khiêm xông bắn tao nơi cam vị thị bắn tọa xông cột bánh chơi ai cả đám chăn Saruth anh nữ rod lịch Hatikaกระทรวงเกษตรกรรมรุกขประมาณนั่งในศาสตร์อันเจงลาหมกดักน้อมการวิธีบัดบังหารส้มกรุบอันเจง
So good morning again. Before we start our program, I would like to make a brief. Please allow me to speak in Khmer. I think that some of the participants can more understand about what is the CASIC and the role in the CASIC. Why the CASIC is very important for the conservation agriculture and sustainable interpretation and agroecology transition in Cambodia. ខ្ញុំសូមសួស្តីសាជាថ្មីមុននឹងនេះខ្ញុំបានចង់ជម្រាបជូនបន្តិចថាតើអ្វីទៅជា CASIC បានន័យថាសម្ព័ន្ធកសិកម្មអភិរក្សហើយនឹងប្រព័ន្ធវប្បកម្មនិរន្តរភាពកម្ពុជាដែលយើងហៅថា CASIC នេះគឺមិនមែនជាការកើតឡើងដោយចៃដន្យនោះទេគឺជាសម្ព័ន្ធមួយដែលយើងបានធ្វើការជាមួយទៅនឹងដៃគូជាច្រើនដៃគូរបស់យើងគឺយើងមាននៅអន្តរក្រសួងដែលយើងមាន line department line ministry ដែលយើងមានពីក្រសួងមហាផ្ទៃក្រសួងបរិស្ថានក្រសួងធនធានទឹក ក្រសួងកិច្ចការនារីហើយនិងសភាពាណិជ្ជកម្មកម្ពុជាដែលជាតំណាងឲ្យខាងឯកជនយើងមានខាងដៃគូរបស់យើងដូចជាមានCIRAD ពីខាងមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលស្រាវជ្រាវអន្តរជាតិរបស់បារាំងយើងមានខាង CSEN ពីខាងដែលគ្រប់គ្រងដោយ USAID យើងមានខាង Swisscontact ដែលគ្រប់គ្រងមកពីខាងប្រទេសស្វីសហើយនឹងវិស័យឯកជនមួយចំនួនដែលយើងចូលរួមក្នុងនេះអញ្ចឹងយើងក៏សូមអរគុណដល់ CIRAD ដែលចាប់ផ្ដើមតាំងពីឆ្នាំ2004មកដែលចាប់ផ្ដើមឲ្យមានការបញ្ចូលនៅការធ្វើកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជានេះរយៈជាង20ឆ្នាំនេះកម្ពុជាបានឆ្លងកាត់នៅបទពិសោធន៍ហើយនឹងការរៀនសូត្រច្រើនអំពីបច្ចេកទេសកសិកម្មអភិរក្សហើយនឹងប្រព័ន្ធកម្មនិរន្តរភាពនៅកម្ពុជានេះឯងហើយក៏យើងសូមអរគុណទៅដល់ AFD ដែលបានជួយគ្រប់គ្រងដល់ការងារនេះនៅកម្ពុជាផងដែររហូតដល់ឥឡូវក៏នៅតែគ្រប់គ្រងបន្តទៅទៀតបាទអ្វីដែលជាការកត់សម្គាល់ដែលខ្ញុំចង់ទាញអារម្មណ៍នៅពេលនេះការកកើតនៅដែលហៅថា CASIC នេះនៅទើបនៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2020នេះទេក៏ប៉ុន្តែវាជារឿងមួយដែលយើងគិតថាជាការចាប់អារម្មណ៍មែនទែនដោយសារតែការចាប់ផ្ដើមត្រឹមតែក្នុងរយៈពេល20ឆ្នាំតែ2020នេះយើងឃើញថាផ្ទៃដីដែលគ្របដណ្ដប់ដោយការងារកសិកម្មអភិរក្សហ្នឹងគឺមានទំហំ2ដងនៅឆ្នាំ2021ហើយ3ដងនៅឆ្នាំ2022នេះគឺជាការចូលរួមនិងការបដិញ្ញាចិត្តពីគ្រប់ដៃគូទាំងអស់ដែលធ្វើការបតិកលាគ្នានៅក្រោមដំបូលឆ័ត្រតែមួយគឺ CASIC នេះឯងដែលទូនាទីជាអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលហើយនឹងជួយផ្ដល់នៅគេហៅថាការផ្ដល់នូវព័ត៌មានគ្រប់អ្នកពាក់ព័ន្ធទាំងអស់បាទអញ្ចឹងយើងសង្ឃឹមថានាពេលខាងមុខកម្ពុជាដែលជាការបដិញ្ញាចិត្តរបស់រដ្ឋាភិបាលកម្ពុជាហើយនឹងទៅនេះក៏សូមអរគុណទៅដល់អាយដាមរដ្ឋមន្ត្រីអាយដាមវេងសុខុនរដ្ឋមន្ត្រីក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងសាស្ត្រដែលអាយដាមមានការជឿជាក់ហើយនឹងការគ្រប់គ្រងដល់យើងខ្ញុំនៅលើការងារកសិកម្មអភិរក្សហើយនឹងប្រព័ន្ធវប្បកម្មនិរន្តរភាពប្រព័ន្ធវប្បកម្មនៅកម្ពុជានេះឯងត្រឹមនេះនៅក្នុងខែធ្នូឆ្នាំ2021កន្លងនេះអាយដាមតាមរយៈរបាយការណ៍សង្ខេបរបស់យើងខ្ញុំអាយដាមនឹងមានការណែនាំនៅថាគម្រោងទាំងឡាយដែលកំពុងតែអនុវត្តនៅកម្ពុជាក្រោមក្រសួងកសិកម្មរុក្ខាប្រមាញ់និងនេសាទហើយនឹងគម្រោងថ្មីទៀតអាយដាមនឹងបញ្ជ្រាបឲ្យមានសកម្មភាពការងារកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនិងប្រព័ន្ធវប្បកម្មនិរន្តរភាពកម្ពុជានេះនៅក្នុងគម្រោងទាំងអស់នេះគឺជាការគ្រប់គ្រងដ៏ខ្លាំងមួយដែលយើងខ្ញុំសូមជ្រាបការនេះថ្លែងអំណរគុណចំពោះការគ្រប់គ្រងពីថ្នាក់ដឹកនាំបាទពិសេសពីអាយដាមវេងសុខុនដែលលោកមានការជឿជាក់ហើយនឹងផ្ដល់នៅទំនុកចិត្តដល់ការងាររបស់CASICនេះឯងនេះគឺជាអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំសង្ខេបហើយខ្ញុំគិតថាកម្ពុជាអ្វីដែលយើងខំប្រឹងរួមគ្នាក្នុងរយៈពេល10ឆ្នាំទៅមុខយើងនឹងឃើញថាកម្ពុជាអាចក្លាយទៅជាមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលឈានមុខមួយទៅលើការងារកសិកម្មអភិរក្សហើយនឹងប្រព័ន្ធវប្បកម្មហើយនឹង technology នៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាហើយខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណខ្ញុំសូមនេះជាការសង្ខេបដើម្បីSo for me brief about what is the CASIC role, what is our future direction to support the conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification and agroecology transition in Cambodia, as well as in the future that we are dreaming Cambodia will be the center of excellence for conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification and agroecology transition in Southeast Asian the region. So right now we believe that based on our experience, based on our commitment, we could achieve it. Thank you. So now, following with the agenda, we have 5 presenters. So for the first presenter, I would like to introduce the Dr. Rémi Cardinael. He is a soil scientist and agronomist at CIRAD, currently based at the University of Zimbabwe. He worked on improved soil management for food security and climate change mitigation. He especially studies soil organic carbon dynamic and greenhouse gas emission under various agroecological practices such as agroforestry, conservation agriculture, and intercropping system in the temperature and tropical region. He is also act as the associated editor for the international peer review journal Plant and Soil and Frontier in Soil Science. He's also a contributing author to the recent refinement to the IPCC guideline for national greenhouse gas inventory. Excellency, locomotive, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Rémi, and I would like to invite Dr. Rémi to give his presentation on the central role of soil carbon and impact of agricultural practices. Dr. Rémi, the floor is yours now. Please. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. So I will just give you a brief overview about soil organic carbon and its role for climate change mitigation and for food security. So let me just start with this beautiful picture of our planet, just to illustrate you the fact that soils, they represent a very, very thin layer. You can see here the total volume occupied by the soil is very, very small compared to the hydrosphere or to the atmosphere. But despite that, the soils, they are the support of many ecosystem services. So we usually distinguish seven main soil functions, as you can see here. And one of them is, of course, acting as a carbon pool and climate regulation. So these different soil functions here, so it's very small, but they are involved in the delivery of many ecosystem services. And these ecosystem services, they are also directly linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see also that soils, they are part of 13 out of 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So it means that it's basically impossible to achieve the SDGs if the soils are not properly managed. So as you know also, a key component of soil is the soil organic matter, or we often talk about soil organic carbon because this is the main constituent of soil organic matter. About 58% of soil organic matter is made of carbon. So here you have the average weight composition of a soil. You can see that most of the mass of a soil is made of mineral matter, so clay particles, silt, sand. There is also water in the soil, and organic matter is a very small mass proportion. Here on average 3%, but 3% is already quite a good soil. In many soils in the world, soil organic matter is actually much lower than that. And despite this very small mass proportion, organic matter is involved in a very important aspect of soil functioning. So it drives soil structure, the soil chemical fertility, the soil biological activity, Organic matter is also involved in the control of water flux and quality, and involved in climate regulation. So just a slide to show you the importance of soil organic carbon for crop production. So here it's a recent study where the authors they did a meta-analysis. So meta-analysis is a synthesis of many studies published at the global level. So here you have the yield. In this case, this is the yield of maize, and here you have the soil organic carbon content of the soil. So we can see that the points are very scattered. We cannot really see a relationship between the two. But it's because a lot of these studies they were done in very various contexts, local climate and pedological content factors. Sorry. So these studies they had different climate factors, texture, or also management, nitrogen fertilization, and irrigation, for example. But now, if the author managed with a model, they were able to maintain all these various factors constant, just to show the effect of soil organic carbon. And they came with this red line here. So we can see that when soil organic carbon increase, we have an increase in associated maize yield up to about 2% of soil organic carbon. We have an increase in crop yield. And also the authors found that globally, about 2/3 of maize production and 64% of wheat production are currently produced in areas where the soil organic carbon content is lower than 2%. So they estimated that if we were able to increase up to 2% all these cropping systems, we could increase, just doing that, increase the global yield maize production by 10% and by 23% for the wheat. So it corresponds to 32% of the yield gap for maize and 60% for wheat. So this is a very huge impact. So now let me show you a global distribution of soil organic carbon stocks. So this is a map of global carbon stocks. We can see that we have very high stocks in the boreal region. Here in blue, you have more than 300 tons of carbon in the first meter of soil, which is very huge. And in some region on the opposite, like here in the Sahara, we have very low values of 25. So this is the same presented here. Latitude 0, we are here in the tropics. We can see we have a huge amount of carbon in the above ground biomass and also a large amount of carbon in the soil. And here the highest amounts they are from the boreal regions. So just to give you also an idea of the importance of soil for carbon. So the soils, they represent 2,400 gigatons of carbon globally. So it's 3 times more carbon than all what is contained into the atmosphere. Currently, we emit about 9 gigatons of carbon per year due to fossil fuel combustion. And deforestation is also leading to about 1 gigaton of carbon per year. And currently, our terrestrial ecosystem, so the vegetation and the soil, they are able to absorb about 1/3 of our emissions. And this is the same for the ocean. So this results in a net increase in the atmosphere carbon of 4.3 gigatons of carbon per year. And this is, of course, the cause of global warming. So now some scientists did a very basic back of the envelope calculation. So if you divide our current fossil fuel emissions, by the total carbon stocks, you get this ratio of 4 per 1,000. So what does that mean? That means that if we were able to increase the global soil organic carbon stocks by 4 per 1,000 per year, we could offset our emissions. And on the contrary, a very small reduction of our global soils carbon stocks, it will be equivalent to a doubling of our emissions. So this is really to highlight the importance of soil for climate. And this is how this 4 per 1,000 initiative was launched in 2015. during the COP21 in Paris. Also, so this basic calculation was made on global soils. So in these global soils, you have also soils that are under forest ecosystems. And we know that in forests, the carbon stocks are already very high, so we cannot increase them much more than that. So actually, the most potential is the highest potential they are in agricultural land. So now, if we do this calculation only for agricultural land, it's estimated that if we are able to increase by 4 per 1,000 in the agricultural land, we could offset 20 to 35% of our global emissions, which is huge. And probably it's not feasible to achieve that because there are a lot of constraints, socioeconomic constraints, but just to give you an idea. So of course, the first priority for climate change mitigation is a reduction, a rapid and massive reduction in fossil fuel emissions. But at the same time, IPCC also recognized the fact that we also need some negative emission technologies, such as carbon sequestration, because there are some residual emissions. Some sectors, it's almost impossible to reach zero emission, especially for the agricultural sector. So now also what drives the change in soil organic carbon stocks? So land use change, of course, is a very important driver, and land management as well. So let me take an example. If we are at the beginning, let's say initial state, we are in the forest, we have a high carbon stock. So now this forest is converted to cropland for agriculture production. Then we observe a large decrease in soil organic carbon, very sharp decrease. And after 20, 30 years, it depends, we reach a new equilibrium. Now we want to increase again this carbon stock, so we can introduce some regenerative practices like cover crops or conservation agriculture, agroforestry, etc. To increase again the carbon. But you can see that the decrease is much faster than the increase. It takes more time to build carbon than to lose carbon. And often, even with regenerative practices, we are often lower than in natural ecosystem. So it means that we must also try to maintain the carbon-rich ecosystems as a high priority. So it means maintaining forest, wetlands, peatlands also. Here, just an example from Zimbabwe, where I currently work. You can see this is conversion of dry forest called Miombo there to cropland in three different regions of Zimbabwe. And with time, we can see a large decrease in soil organic carbon. Actually, we lost in 10 years, we lost 50% of the soil organic carbon. So now what drives also soil organic carbon increase? So soil organic carbon stocks is basically a balance between inputs of carbon and outputs. So you have carbon dioxide that is assimilated by plants during photosynthesis, and then this carbon is transferred to the soil by litter fall, by crop residues, by roots turnover and exudation. So this is what we call endogenous inputs, because these inputs of carbon, they are produced directly on the plot. Then you can also have exogenous inputs. So like manure, compost, so it means organic inputs that come from outside of the field. And of course, there are some outputs of these stocks. So there is a permanent mineralization. So it means a permanent decomposition of soil organic carbon due to the microbes that are in the soil, fungi, bacteria. And you can also have a loss of carbon with fires, with erosion, and with leaching of dissolved organic carbon. So the soil organic carbon stocks, they are really driven by this balance between inputs and outputs, but also this balance is buffered by stabilization processes that we have in the soil, and that really much depends on the soil type, especially soil texture, etc. So Apparently, also there is a dilemma with soil carbon because at the same time we want high and stable soil organic carbon stocks for climate change mitigation, but we also want soil organic matter to provide nutrients for the crops and also to sustain biological activity. And this is only possible when the carbon is being decomposed. So how do we deal with that? So it was well illustrated in this paper from Jensen in 2006. And this author compared the soil carbon stocks to a dam. So the water here in the dam is equivalent to the soil organic carbon stocks. So we want this to be high. And we want the outputs also to be high. In the case of a dam, it's to generate electricity. And in the case of soil, is to release nutrients for the crops, for instance. So how do we have at the same time high carbon stocks and high mineralization? Well, the only possibility is to have high inputs. So if we want to increase carbon stocks and have also the benefit of it, we need to have high inputs. And inputs of carbon, they are mainly driven by biomass production in the field. So this is what we call net primary productivity here, and also a fraction of it, because when you have biomass production, part of it can be exported for grain yield, for feed, etc. So it's really the combination of the two that drives the inputs into the soil. Also, not all soil organic carbon is equal. There are different types of carbon in the soil, different forms of carbon. So one of them is what we call the particulate organic carbon. This is mainly plant decomposing plant residue of small size. And you have also a very highly processed transformed organic matter, which is being decomposed by the microbes, and that is stabilized on the clay fraction and silt fraction. This is what we call the mineral associated organic matter. And you can see that these two main types of soil carbon, they have a very different dynamic in the soil. The label one, the particulate organic matter, is being replaced very quickly. Here you have the time, and here you have the proportion that is renewed every year. So this label carbon is renewed in 1 or 2 years. But the stable one on the clay fraction, it can take, here you see 25 years just to renew a third of it. So 100 years just to renew this fraction. And these different types of carbon, they are involved in different functions of soil. The labile one is mainly important for biological activity, for the cation exchange capacity, and also for the soil structure. While the other one, the stable one, is very important for the long-term carbon storage. Also, it's not possible to increase these two types of carbon in the same way. The stable one here, sorry, it's smaller, but here it's the carbon content in the soil. So if you increase it, you will see that at some point you will reach a maximum for this fraction, the stable one, because you will have saturated the carbon that is the surface available on the clay particles. And on the opposite, the labile one that is free in the soil, that is not interacting with the mineral, you can basically increase them as much as possible, no limit. So there are different soil organic carbon stabilization processes. I will briefly explain them. So there is one about recalcitrance. It's linked to the chemical composition of the carbon. Then you have processes linked to interaction with ions and minerals in the soil. Also physical protection into aggregates. It's very important to limit access of microbes to the carbon. So physical protection and also some biological control. Also very important is that the roots carbon is more stabilized, being more preferentially stabilized compared to the above ground carbon. And in the last decades, we also realized that what we call humus, the concept, is not relevant anymore. So humus, initially we thought that carbon is made of very high macromolecules, difficult to decompose, like lignin, humic acid, etc. But this now new research found that is actually not true. Most molecules are decomposed in the soil, and what remains in the long term is very highly processed carbon. So I will not go too much into the detail, but here we can see that we have different inputs of carbon in a field. You can have labile carbon like residues from legume crops, and here low quality residues like wood, branches, etc. And the one that will increase the most stable carbon into the soil is the labile ones, because they are easily decomposed by the microbes. And so it will generate a lot of microbial byproducts that will be stabilized on the mineral fractions. So is the 4/1000 achievable? So just an example for France, we have an average of 50 tons of carbon per hectare in the topsoil. So if we want to increase by 4/1000, it will be equivalent to an increase of 0.2 tons of carbon per hectare and per year. And different meta-analysis found this is actually very possible. Like with cover crops, on average in temperate conditions, you can reach 0.32. Conservation agriculture, you can reach 0.23, agroforestry 0.25. So at the field scale, it's very possible to reach this kind of rates. Also, recent meta-analysis we did in sub-Saharan Africa, where you have here the soil organic carbon storage rate for agroforestry and conservation agriculture, with here the 4/1000 target. And we can see that in most of the cases in the field, we observe higher sequestration rate than the 4/1000 initiative. So for no-till system, we can see also that this is another meta-analysis. We have more carbon in the topsoil compared to plowing system, but a bit deeper. So it means to assess the full impact of no-till on carbon sequestration, we need to dig deeper to look at the whole soil profile. And also we found that here you have the carbon sequestration in Africa for conservation agriculture with minimum tillage or no tillage. Here no tillage with residues, and here minimum tillage with residues and intercrop or rotation. And the highest rates, they are found when the package of conservation agriculture is implemented. So it means just reducing soil tillage is maybe not enough to increase carbon. We need to have more biomass production, so with residues and intercrops, etc. So I'm almost done. Also, it's important to notice that the carbon sequestration, they depend very much on the initial carbon stocks. When you have a degraded soil, so low initial soil carbon, you can get high rates of accumulation because you start from very low, and this decreases when you increase carbon in the soil. Also, the carbon sequestration will decrease with time because you will get to a new equilibrium. So also what is very important for soil organic carbon management is that it's a constant care of the soil rather than a one-shot action. If you stop carbon sequestrating practices and if it's not replaced by an equivalent one, then you will lose again this carbon that you store. And of course, storing soil organic carbon has a cost. Here also an example in France where we try to evaluate the technical potential of different practices, agroforestry, cover crops, temporary grassland in rotation, etc. So we estimated the cost per hectare and the cost per ton of carbon dioxide. And we found that in France, we could achieve as a maximum 13% of mitigation of our national emission, which is already a lot. Huh? And also that this could be achieved for prices ranging from 55 euro per ton, which is approximately the current value of carbon on the market, and 250 euro. 250 euro is the target value in France for 2030. So this will cost, if we want to achieve the 60 million tons of CO2 per year, this will cost between 2 billion and 13 billion per year in France. So you can see that it's not free. So my last slide, a few take-home messages. So first of all, we need to reduce greenhouse gases emission and maintain carbon-rich ecosystems. And in parallel, we need to restore degraded land. Also, increasing soil organic carbon has a lot of co-benefits, biodiversity, crop yields, etc. And they are critical to achieve many SDGs. It is also very technically feasible to increase the carbon stocks at the field scale with various practices. There are actually many options, and constant care is required. However, to scale out these practices from a field to a region or a country, we have a lot of challenges because we will need quite a lot of nutrients. There is potential competition for the use of biomass, for feed, for materials, etc. So these are the main challenges. And I think this requires very larger systemic changes. For example, a better crop livestock integration, a circular food system to make sure that we recycle all the biomass and the nutrients. And the sequestrating carbons will not happen alone. It has a cost, and so it needs very much public policies, also consumer awareness, and private sector to support the farmers for this transition. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rémi, for your good and very useful presentation. So from your presentation that we learned the importance of soil organic carbon stock with your various crop, global soil, the carbon stock, the input vs the output of the soil organic carbon, and the provide the strategic direction how we can deal with the carbon organic stock in short and long-term run. And more than that, he also introduced the 4 per 1,000 initiative by the French Ministry of Agriculture. I think it's very important as well that we also learn from this these initiatives, and also very benefit for us as well. And also introduce a cost of the soil organic carbon that we can consider how we could work together to reduce the emission of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Because of the time constraint that we are a little bit behind the schedule, I would like to propose that after all the presenters, we will have the panel discussion, and I will invite all the presenters in front of us on the podium. And then please, the Excellency, local ladies and gentlemen, prepare your question for any presenter that you are interested, that we will have time. So now, thank you, Dr. Rémi, for your good presentation. Of course, we learn about his presentation. We learn about our concern about the carbon dioxide emission in the atmosphere, globally, regionally, as well as in Cambodia. And we also would like to take the opportunity to let Excellency, local ladies and gentlemen, to know what Cambodia is doing now to contribute on the carbon dioxide emission in the atmosphere, as well as what we are trying to work together with the other partner to introduce the conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification, as well as the agroecological transition in Cambodia. So now we would like to introduce the Dr. SENG Vang. He is the director of the Department of Agriculture, Land Resources Management of the General Directorate of Agriculture of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery. He obtained his PhD in soil science and has over 25 years of experience in soil research, land management, and crop nutrition, pre- and post-harvest handling of agricultural crop protection, and rural livelihood assessment and technology adoption by farmers. He is a widely published author and co-author on research terms such as agriculture and water, crop diversification, land resources, plant nutrition, and rice production system under climate change impact, which include a strong focus on the Cambodian farming system. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. SENG Vang, and I would like to invite Dr. SENG Vang to give his presentation on status on land use on soil carbon initiatives and preserve and increase soil carbon in Cambodia. So Dr. SENG Vang, the floor is yours now. So you have 45 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, okay, សូមអរគុណដល់អាយដាមច័ន្ទស្រុតដែលលោកបានធ្វើការណែនាំដល់រូបភាពបាទហើយបាទក៏មានសេចក្តីសុំនោះរីករាយដែលបានចែករំលែកព័ត៌មានបាទតាមរយៈបទបង្ហាញនេះជាមួយអាយដាមលោកទាវលោកស្រីនាងកញ្ញាទាំងអស់បាទហើយដោយសារនិយាយខ្ញុំមិនសូវនិយាយអង់គ្លេសមិនសូវរលូនល្អទេតាំងពីយើងធ្វើការជាខ្មែរនៅស្រុកខ្មែរមកបាទអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំសូមនិយាយខ្មែរប៉ុន្តែបទបង្ហាញជាភាសាបរទេសជាអង់គ្លេសអញ្ចឹងបងដែលជាបរទេសគាត់អាចមើលយល់បាទអញ្ចឹងសូមអរគុណច្រើនចំពោះការនេះបាទហើយបទបង្ហាញរបស់ខ្ញុំនេះគឺมันមានលក្ខណៈបច្ចេកទេសវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រខ្លាំងដោយបទបង្ហាញរបស់លោកបណ្ឌិតRémi Cardinael បាទគឺគាត់លើកពីការងារជាសាស្ត្របច្ចេកទេសពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងកាបូនកម្មវិធីស្មានទាំងចអីចំណែកខ្ញុំគិតពីស្ថានភាពពីការប្រើប្រាស់ដីបាទសកលកាបូននៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងបាទគឺតើយើងបានធ្វើអីខ្លះបាទយើងមានអ្វីខ្លះយើងបានធ្វើអីខ្លះបាទពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងការអភិរក្សបាទធនធានដីរបស់យើងបាទដើម្បីធានានៅសន្តិសុខស្បៀងហើយនិងសុវត្ថិភាពស្បៀងទៅអនាគតបាទអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំបាទមានចំណុចប្រហែល6 7នេះដើម្បីបង្ហាញបាទបង្ហាញជូននៅក្នុងនេះបាទទី1ចង់និយាយថាអំពីព័ត៌មានអំពីធនធានដីប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងបាទខ្ញុំគិតថាលោកស្រីនាងកញ្ញាទាំងអស់ក៏ចង់ដឹងដែរថាតើធនធានដីនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងនឹងវាមានប្រមាណប្រភេទមានប្រមាណក្រុមចំណាត់ថ្នាក់យ៉ាងម៉េចបាទហើយអ្វីដែលយើងបានធ្វើនេះគឺក្នុងកម្រិតអន្តរជាតិបាទកម្រិតអន្តរជាតិយើងហៅថា WRB soil classification បាទយើងប្រើ system នេះមួយបាទដែល harmonize បានន័យថាមានការទទួលស្គាល់ជាលក្ខណៈអន្តរជាតិបាទអញ្ចឹងទេយើងបានធ្វើការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវដោយឈរលើមូលដ្ឋាននៃការធ្វើចំណាត់ថ្នាក់មុនបាទដូចជាក្របខើតាំងពីដើមឆ្នាំ60បាទហើយមានចំណាត់ថ្នាក់របស់ FAO ក្រោយមកទៀតបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងបានសិក្សាលើមូលដ្ឋាននៃការសិក្សាមុនហ្នឹងបាទយកមកធ្វើជាប្រាក់ទីថ្មីបាទគឺចំណាត់ថ្នាក់នេះគឺយើងរៀបចំធ្វើត្រឹមឆ្នាំ2021 យើងសម្រាប់បានអញ្ចឹងយើងមានប្រភេទដីបាទនៅក្នុងនេះតារាងហ្នឹងយើងមើលទៅឃើញមានយើងមាន13ដីក្រុមដីធំនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងតែឈ្មោះគឺឈ្មោះអន្តរជាតិបាទអញ្ចឹងអស់លោកអាចគិតថាចូលមិនដាក់ឈ្មោះជាខ្មែរបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងអត់ទាន់បានទេឈ្មោះជាខ្មែរបាទដោយសារនេះយើងត្រូវចូលក្នុង system អន្តរជាតិសិនដើម្បីឲ្យគេស្គាល់ទាំងអស់គ្នាអញ្ចឹងអន្តរជាតិគេស្គាល់ពីធនធានដីរបស់យើងបាទទើបគេអាចជួយធ្វើការឲ្យសហការជាមួយយើងបានយើងប្រើភាសាមួយដែលយល់ទាំងអស់គ្នាបាទហើយការប្រើឈ្មោះក្នុងស្រុកយើងនឹងពិនិត្យធ្វើបន្តទៅទៀតបាទនេះជាការងារច្រើននៅពាក់ព័ន្ធការងារគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានដីកសិកម្មហើយបើយើងមើលនៅក្នុងតារាងនេះបាទជាមួយផែនទីហ្នឹងគឺដីរបស់យើងហៅថា agri-resource អាហ្នឹងឈ្មោះដីក្រុមធំបាទគឺមានប្រហែលជា 50% ជាប្រភេទដីប្រភេទដីដែលខ្សត់ជាតិដីដែលងាយរងគ្រោះទៅនឹង degradation ការធ្លាក់ចុះគុណភាពដី agri-resource នេះបាទហើយមួយចំនួនដីហ្នឹងក៏មាននៅតំបន់កំពង់រាបមួយចំនួនក៏មាននៅតំបន់ទំនាបបាទប្រភេទដីផ្សេងទៀតដូចជាពួកយើងមើលក្នុងនេះឃើញមានពពួក chemical ពពួកលបទុសលមកលបទុសលលេខ8អាហ្នឹងក៏ជាប្រភេទដីដែលងាយរងគ្រោះនឹង degradation ផងដែរណាវាច្រើននៅក្នុងតំបន់កំពង់រាបតំបន់ដែលមានការកាប់ឆ្ការព្រៃឈើហើយអវត្តទៅជាដីមិនព្រៃឈើដំណើរគោលបំណងសេដ្ឋកិច្ចឬការអវត្តកសិកម្មបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងមើលគ្រាន់តែពីរមុខហ្នឹងវាឡើង50 + 16 60 70% បាទជាការដែលយើងត្រូវយកចិត្តទុកដាក់បាទដីអស់ហ្នឹងបាទដែលវាងាយរងគ្រោះទៅនឹងការធ្លាក់ចុះគុណភាពដោយសារពេលកំណត់ខ្ញុំមិនលំអិតច្រើនទេបាទខ្ញុំសូមជំរាបជូនទូទៅហ្នឹងនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងបាទការបញ្ហានៃការហូរច្រោះដី soil erosion នេះក៏ជាបញ្ហាមួយបាទដូចខ្ញុំបានជំរាបជូនខាងដើមវាផ្សារភ្ជាប់គ្នាទៅក្នុងដីបាទទៅលើប្រភេទដី agri-soil អីហ្នឹងគឺដីដែលស្ថិតនៅក្នុងស្ថានភាពនៃការគ្រោះថ្នាក់ហានិភ័យទៅនឹងការហូរច្រោះអញ្ចឹងយើងមើលផែនទីនេះបាទវាបង្ហាញថាយ៉ាងម៉េចគឺដីនៅតំបន់កសិកម្មបាទតំបន់កសិកម្មអាពណ៌រៀងអានេះដាក់ពណ៌អីហ្នឹងពណ៌រៀងនិយាយចង់បាទពណ៌ដាក់រៀងទួយជែកបន្តិចអាហ្នឹងចាំគិតចឹងណាបាទអាហ្នឹងវាមិនសូវជាមានបញ្ហាហូរច្រោះឯខ្លាំងទី erosion ណាដោយសារភាគច្រើនវានៅកន្លែងទំនាបដែលមានជំរាលដែលវាមិនជាបញ្ហាស្រាប់ណាដូចដីដើមស្រូវដែរហ្នឹងប៉ុន្តែបើសិនយើងមើលអាពណ៌ក្រហមមានអាពណ៌កាឈូកបាទគឺអាហ្នឹងដែលមានហានិភ័យនឹងការរងគ្រោះដោយការហូរច្រោះដោយសារវាស្ថិតនៅក្នុងទីជំរាលហើយជាប្រភេទដី agri-soil លបទុសលដូចខ្ញុំបានជំរាបជូនអញ្ចឹងណាបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងមានប្រហែលជាខ្ទង់កន្លះលានហិកតាដីនេះរងគ្រោះខ្លាំងនឹងការហូរច្រោះបាទហើយមាន7.7 លានហិកតាគឺវាងាយរងគ្រោះជាមធ្យមទៅនឹងការហូរច្រោះណាបាទអញ្ចឹងនេះជាតួលេខមេដើម្បីយើងដឹងជាមូលដ្ឋានបាទព្រោះបាទយល់ថាដីអស់ទាំងនេះគឺកំពុងតែវិវត្តទៅរកដីកសិកម្មហើយនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងណាតិចទៀតខ្ញុំបង្ហាញតួលេខបាទហើយឃើញក្នុងរូបនេះតើយើងដឹងថារូបហ្នឹងថានៅស្រុកខ្មែរនៅណារូបអាហូរច្រោះបញ្ឈរនេះណាឥឡូវខ្ញុំស្គាល់ទេអាយដាមលោកមន្ត្រីជឿស្គាល់រូបហ្នឹងនៅណារូបហ្នឹងគឺនៅស្រុកខ្មែរយើងណានៅស្រុកខ្មែរយើងបាទហ្នឹងហើយនៅស្រុកខ្មែរយើងដីលបទុសលណាបាទនៅប្រទេសនៅស្រុកខ្មែរយើងហ្នឹងគឺនៅខេត្តកំពង់ស្ពឺក្នុងស្រុកភ្នំស្រួយណាបាទស្រុកភ្នំស្រួយខេត្តកំពង់ស្ពឺហ្នឹងឯងបាទអីហ្នឹងហូរច្រោះបាទហើយកន្លែងនេះគឺកសិកម្មយើងត្រូវគិតណាត្រូវគិតថាតើយើងបង្វែរព្រៃឈើឲ្យទៅជាដីកសិកម្មឬដីបែបហ្នឹងទៅបាននេះហើយត្រូវធ្វើកសិកម្មធ្វើអ្វីណាអញ្ចឹងបានណានេះជាសំណួររបស់លោកស្រីអាយដាមលោកស្រីបាទទាំងអស់ដែលចោទសួរតើកសិកម្មយើងត្រូវតម្រង់ទិសម៉េចបើមានករណីដីអញ្ចឹងដែលផ្ដល់មកឲ្យយើងហើយណាបាទអរគុណពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងព័ត៌មានអំពីការធ្លាក់ចុះបញ្ហាដីដែលងាយរងគ្រោះនឹងបញ្ហាធ្លាក់ចុះគុណភាពដីជាពិសេស erosion នេះយើងក៏បានធ្វើការសិក្សាបាទជាមួយនឹងUNFCCC Global Mechanism បាទ ដើម្បីដឹងថាតើបញ្ហានៃការធ្លាក់ចុះគុណភាពដីនឹងវាធ្វើឲ្យមានការខាតបង់សេដ្ឋកិច្ចយ៉ាងម៉េចដែរនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាព័ត៌មាននេះសម្រាប់ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងអញ្ចឹងណាបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងបើសិនជាមានបញ្ហាធ្លាក់ចុះការខូចខាតគុណភាពដីនេះធ្វើឲ្យយើងបាត់បង់សេដ្ឋកិច្ចប្រហែលជា$677 លានក្នុងមួយឆ្នាំ$677 លានបាទហើយនេះគឺនៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2007បាទដោយសារតួលេខហ្នឹងគេមានព័ត៌មានសម្រាប់សិក្សាក្នុងរយៈពេលហ្នឹងបាទរយៈពេលហ្នឹងហើយយើងមើលទៅតម្លៃវាអស់ប្រហែលជា8% នៃ GDP របស់យើងការខូចខាតនេះបាទអញ្ចឹងបាទហើយយើងមើលក្នុងនេះតែយើងគួរចាប់អារម្មណ៍មួយទៀតគឺការធ្វើផែនការបាទឥឡូវដែលយើងកំពុងធ្វើនេះណាបើសិនជាយើង take action បាទបានន័យថាបើសិនយើងធ្វើសកម្មភាពដើម្បីហ្នឹង
Also is the action plan. Now doing the action plan, preparing. If you take action of that, certify we lost.
បាទហ្នឹងគឺទូនេះខ្ញុំនិយាយតាមគេសិក្សាគេមានអានេះមិនមែនគ្រាន់តែយកលេខដាក់ក្នុង Excel ដាក់អីឲ្យវិភាគចេញទេបាទគឺគេ run ជា modeling របស់គេណាដើម្បីចេញជាតួលេខហ្នឹងបាទអញ្ចឹងបានការយកចិត្តទុកដាក់ការលាក់ចុះគុណភាពដីនេះបាទហើយវាទៅការឆ្លើយតបទៅនឹងការលាក់ចុះគុណភាពដីណាមានតម្លៃនេះបាទជាមួយនឹងធនធានដីរបស់យើងក៏បានធ្វើផែនទីបង្ហាញថាតើដីយើងហ្នឹងវាមានកន្លែងណាវាស្តុកកបោនប្រមាណបាទដោយលោកដុកទ័រកាឌីណាល់លោកបានបង្ហាញមិញហ្នឹងបាទបញ្ហាស្តុកកបោននេះក៏វាសំខាន់បាទសំខាន់ក្នុងការពិនិត្យមើលថាតើយើងត្រូវធ្វើម៉េចដើម្បីបង្កើនការស្តុកកបោននៅកន្លែងដែលមានកបោនទៀតហើយរៀបចំផែនការយុទ្ធសាស្ត្រម៉េចឆ្លើយតបណាឆ្លើយតប
So that to increase our carbon
យើងមើលក្នុងនេះដែលគឺក្នុងឆ្នាំ2000
and prepare our
បាទគឺពលឿននេះ
you know
គឺតូចជាង20តោនក្នុងហិកតាបាទតូចជាង20តោនក្នុងហិកតាពលឿន
so we look here
ហើយនេះបានយើងថាតោនច្រើនទៅមានតោនតិចពាក្យច្រើនយើងដាំបានតែខែភាសាមានភ្លៀងមានអីមកទឹកជោគជាន់ហ្នឹងយើងដាំប៉ុន្តែខែ5 6 7 5 6ខែស្ងួតរើអាហ្នឹងហើយជាបញ្ហាដែលវាអំណោយផលទៅដល់ការ degrade ណា organic matter degradation អញ្ចឹងណាបាទអញ្ចឹងតូចជាង2ហើយអាពណ៌ស្វាយនេះទៅតូចជាង20ពណ៌ស្វាយនេះគឺតម្បាក់ទៅជា20ទៅ40តោនក្នុងហិកតាបាទហើយអាពណ៌រាងកាហ្វេថ្នោតហ្នឹងគឺពី40ទៅ60តោនក្នុងហិកតាណាស្តុកកបោនរបស់យើងក្នុងនេះតាមតួលេខរបស់ដុកទ័រកាឌីណាល់មិញគាត់ថាបើយើងមានស្តុក50តោនក្នុងហិកតាវាស្មើនឹងប្រហែលជា 0.2% បាទនៃកបោននៅក្នុងហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងណាប៉ុន្តែគោលដៅគឺ 0.4 អញ្ចឹងយើងទៅបាន 0.2 ទេបើមើលតួលេខមួយចំនួនក្នុងនេះអញ្ចឹងណាបាទតែដែលភាគច្រើនគឺយើងនៅក្នុងអាពណ៌ស្វាយហ្នឹងនៅក្រោម50អញ្ចឹងយើងក៏អត់ទាន់បានដល់ 0.2 ដែរណាយើង20ទៅ40អត់ទាន់បាន 0.2% ដល់ឡើយទេបើយើងឆ្លើយតបទៅនឹង for per meal initiative បាននេះ4ពាក្យពាន់នោះបាទយើងក៏មានការចូលរួមធ្វើ sequestration map បាទសម្រាប់កម្រិតពិភពលោក Global Soil Organic Carbon Sequestration map អញ្ចឹងកម្ពុជាយើងបាទក្នុងនាមជា National Focal Point នៃ Global Soil Partnership គឺយើងចូលរួមធ្វើការងារហ្នឹងហើយមន្ត្រីរបស់យុវដ្ឋានគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានកសិកម្មគឺសកម្មក្នុងការងារនេះបាទការងារនេះយើងបានចូលរួមធ្វើបាទហើយការប្រជុំក្នុងអន្តរជាតិគឺកម្ពុជាយើងគឺមានទិន្នន័យដល់គេនៅពេលដែលប្រទេសមួយចំនួនច្រើនហើយប្រទេសដែលមានការសមត្ថភាពរីកចម្រើនខ្លាំងជាងយើងមិនទាន់មានតួលេខនឹងផ្ដល់ឲ្យគេបាទហើយកម្ពុជាយើងធ្វើបានអញ្ចឹងណាបាទអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំក៏សូមអរគុណដែរដល់មន្ត្រីជំនាញរបស់យុវដ្ឋានគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានកសិកម្មបាទដែលបាន ប្រឹងប្រែងធ្វើនេះបាទទូលេខនេះឥឡូវយើងមកពិនិត្យមើលស្ថានភាពគម្របដីឬការប្រើប្រាស់ដីនៃយើងរបស់កម្ពុជាយើងវិញបាទស្ថិតិដែលយើងប្រើចុងក្រោយបំផុតរបស់ក្រសួងបរិស្ថានគឺយើងមានឆ្នាំ2018ដែលបោះពុម្ពនៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2020នេះណាបាទបោះពុម្ពឆ្នាំ2020អញ្ចឹងយើងមើលស្ថិតិនេះបាទគឺគម្របព្រៃឈើយើងមានប្រហែលជា 46.86% បាទ 46.86% ប៉ុន្តែរបស់ក្រសួងកសិកម្មស្ថិតិរបស់ក្រសួងកសិកម្មយើងបើយើងមើលផ្ទៃដី8លាន 5 សែនហិកតាជាងដូចគ្នាប៉ុន្តែភាគរយរបស់ក្រសួងកសិកម្ម 46.97% បាទអញ្ចឹងវាខុសគ្នាអាកតុយនឹងបន្តិចអញ្ចឹងអត់បញ្ហាទេអាកតុយនឹងខុសគ្នាប្រហែលជាមកពីផ្ទៃដីសរុបការប្រើប្រាស់ផ្ទៃដីសរុបចែកខុសគ្នាបាទអានេះផ្ទៃដីសរុបដែលយកមកប្រើហ្នឹងប្រហែលមិនមែន 181,035 ទេ 181,000 ប្រហែល100ទៀតអញ្ចឹងណាបាទអញ្ចឹងវាធ្វើអាកតុយនេះចុះអញ្ចឹងកុំបារម្ភអីតួលេខនេះបាទខ្ញុំគិតថាវា close enough បាទអញ្ចឹងណាបាទហើយនេះគឺវាមានដូងព្រេងហើយវាមានកស៊ូនៅក្នុងនិយមន័យព្រៃឈើបាទរបស់កម្ពុជាយើងនេះគឺថាយើងមានអាពីរហ្នឹងចូលទៅក្នុងហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងណាបាទសល់ពីនេះបាទប៉ុន្តែអាបុកទឹកណាសល់ពីនេះគឺ7លាន 5 សែនហិកតាជាងគិតថាក្នុងហ្នឹងយើងដាក់ថាដីកសិកម្មប៉ុន្តែមានកន្លែងខ្លះមិនទាន់ធ្វើកសិកម្មបាទអញ្ចឹងប៉ុណ្ណឹង7លាន 5 សែនហិកតាជាងឃើញទេបាទនេះមាន dropland ហើយដីដាំស្រូវបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងមើលថាបើសិនជាយើងធ្វើពេញអស់លទ្ធភាព7លាន 5 សែនហិកតាយើងក៏មិនធម្មតាដែរកសិកម្មយើងអញ្ចឹងបាទបាទអញ្ចឹងមានកន្លែងខ្លះដែលអត់ទាន់បានធ្វើបាទអានេះយើងទូស្គាល់បាទមកមើលជាក់ស្ដែងផ្នែកប្រភេទនៃការប្រើប្រាស់ដីក្នុងចំណាត់ថ្នាក់កសិកម្មនេះយើងមានដីចម្ការដីស្រែបាទយើងដីចម្ការនៅក្នុងស្ថិតិនេះគឺយើងមានប្រហែលជា3លាន3លាន 2 សែនហិកតាជាងបាទប្រហែលជា7-10ឬក៏ 8-10% ណា 7-10 នៃ 8-10% បាទហើយយើងមានដីស្រែប្រហែលជា4លាន 3 សែនហិកតាបាទខ្ញុំនិយាយនេះគត់បាទអញ្ចឹងមានប្រហែលជាខ្ទង់ 23.6 ឬក៏ 24% ណាអាហ្នឹងដីស្រែបាទហើយក្រៅហ្នឹងយើងមានចម្ការដូងប្រេងប្រហែលជា 52,000 ហិកតាបាទមានដីចម្ការកស៊ូមានប្រហែលជាជាងកន្លះលានហិកតាអញ្ចឹងណាបាទអញ្ចឹងនេះបើយើងសរុបមើលនេះបូកមានវាលស្មៅទៀតបាទអញ្ចឹងវាលស្មៅនេះគឺអត់មែនកសិកម្មទេមិនដែលដោយសារវាមានចូលក្នុង category ដែលមិនមែនព្រៃឈើបាទអញ្ចឹងក៏បូកចូលមកវាឃើញសរុប8លានជាងបាទហ្នឹងស្ថានភាពការប្រើប្រាស់អីហើយយើងបានបង្កើតជាផែនទីនេះបាទដែលឆ្លុះបញ្ចាំងអំពីការប្រើប្រាស់កសិកម្មកម្រិត level នេះគឺ level ធំអញ្ចឹងណាបាទអត់ទាន់ដឹងថាក្នុងដីចម្ការហ្នឹងមានដំណាំស្វាយចន្ទីពោតមានអីប្រហែលអត់ទាន់នេះអាហ្នឹងយើងកំពុងតែធ្វើបាទខ្ញុំជំរាបឲ្យហើយអាហ្នឹងអាចមានសំណួរបាទតើរាជរដ្ឋាភិបាលយើងបានធ្វើអីខ្លះពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងបញ្ហាដែលយើងមានគឺ commitment ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងជាប្រទេសភាគហត្ថលេខីមួយនៅក្នុងអនុសញ្ញាUNFCCC ណាបាទស្ដីពីការប្រយុទ្ធប្រឆាំងនឹងការធ្លាក់ចុះគុណភាពដីបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងមានឯកសារកម្មវិធីសកម្មភាពជាតិដែលប្រយុទ្ធប្រឆាំងការធ្លាក់ចុះគុណភាពដីនេះ 2018-2027 បាទដោយលោកទាវAsikinលោកបានលើកនៅក្នុងសន្ទរកថាបើករបស់លោកទាវបាទគឺយើងមានហ្នឹងហើយក្នុងឯកសារនេះបាននិយាយច្បាស់អំពីសកម្មភាពដែលត្រូវតែធ្វើដើម្បីទប់ស្កាត់ការធ្លាក់ចុះគុណភាពដីក្នុងនោះមានការធ្វើកែលម្អជីជាតិដីកសិកម្មបាទគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានដីកសិកម្មហើយនឹងបញ្ហាព្រៃឈើបាទបញ្ហាការព្រៃឈើបាទហើយឆ្លើយតបទៅនឹង LDN ឬក៏ដំណាប់នេះបាទយើងហៅថា land degradation LDN land degradation neutrality target setting បាទនេះក្រសួងកសិកម្មខាងនឹងនេសាទយើងបានចូលរួមធ្វើហើយយើងឆ្លើយតបក្នុងក្របខ័ណ្ឌ UNFCCC ដែរបាទយើងមាន target 4បាទដើម្បីចូលរួមមកគេបាទចូលរួមគេបាទ ដូចខ្ញុំជំរាបជូនហ្នឹងគឺកម្ពុជាយើងបើយើងមិនធ្វើអាហ្នឹងគឺយើងអត់មានអ្វីទៅចូលរួមជាមួយគេ report មកថាកម្ពុជាអត់មានអញ្ចឹងតែយើងធ្វើគឺ report មក126ប្រទេសមានកម្ពុជាយើងក្នុងហ្នឹងបាទអញ្ចឹងបាទគឺឯកសារនេះគឺយើងប្រជុំ UNCCD ម្ដងគឺគេបង្ហាញថាប្រទេសណាបានចូលរួមធ្វើអីខ្លះបាទអញ្ចឹងការសំខាន់យើងបានធ្វើគឺយើងបានចូលរួមអញ្ចឹងបើយើងអត់ធ្វើអត់មានអីចូលរួមមួយគេបាទអាហ្នឹងក៏មិនជាល្អដែរបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងបានវិវត្តនឹងការចូលរួមគ្រប់បាទសកម្មភាពទាំងអស់នឹង UNCCD នេះបាទសកម្មអាយដាមមានសិទ្ធលោកជា focal point នៃ UNCCD បាទរបស់កម្ពុជាយើងបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងមើលខ្ញុំសូមគិតថា target នេះគិតត្រឹមឆ្នាំ2030តែយើងត្រូវសម្រេចឲ្យបានអីមួយគឺគម្របព្រៃឈើគម្របព្រៃឈើនេះគឺការសិក្សានេះគឺយើងថាយើងឲ្យកើនឡើងបាន 47% គម្របព្រៃឈើឥឡូវនេះយើងមានប្រមាណដែលខ្ញុំបង្ហាញមុននឹងទិញ 46.86% អញ្ចឹងជិតដល់ហើយបាទជិតដល់ហើយហើយសកម្មភាពរបស់ក្រសួងកសិកម្មលោកខាងអាមាញ់នេសាទបាទរបស់រដ្ឋបាលព្រៃឈើបាទលោកក៏បានបង្ហាញអំពីការងារវិវត្តនឹងពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងការដាំឈើដាំអីបាទនៅក្នុងសន្និបាតថ្មីនេះបាទអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំបាទយល់ថាសកម្មភាពនេះនឹងរួមចំណែកទៅដល់ការសម្រេចបាននឹងគម្របព្រៃឈើបាទជាមួយក្រសួងដែលពាក់ព័ន្ធជាពិសេសក្រសួងបរិស្ថានបាទគឺជាមួយក្រសួងកសិកម្មយើងគឺយើងរួមគ្នាធ្វើដើម្បីសម្រេចបាននៅតួលេខនេះបាទហើយយើងបាន 46.86 ទី2បញ្ហាឆ្នាំ2030រក្សាកំណើនកសិកម្មរបស់យើងឲ្យនៅ 5% បាទនៅ 5% ឥឡូវនេះថ្មីត្រឹមឆ្នាំ2021យើងមានកំណើន 4.7% ជិតដល់ទៀតបាទជិតដល់បាទ commitment របស់យើងបាទអញ្ចឹងបើមិនដល់បានប៉ុណ្ណឹងក៏លំបាកថាយើងសប្បាយដែរបាទយើងបានលេខប៉ុណ្ណេះណាទោះបីក្នុងស្ថានភាពកូវីដស្ថានភាពអីយ៉ាងម៉េចក៏ដោយគឺយើងសម្រេចបានកំណើនមួយគួរឲ្យយើងអសាទរណាគឺ 4% ត្រឹមឆ្នាំ2021ទី3ឆ្នាំ2030ពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងសវនកម្មការបោនេះគឺជា commitment មួយរបស់ប្រទេសបាទដែលខ្ញុំនិយាយទូនៅ121ប្រទេសហ្នឹងគឺប្រទេសមួយត្រូវ set target ហ្នឹងអូខេបាទហើយកម្ពុជាយើងហ្នឹងដាក់ 0.12 ហ្នឹងខាង UN ហ្នឹងគេសិក្សាមកគេឃើញថាយើងបាត់អស់ប្រមាណភាគរយក្នុងរយៈ12ឆ្នាំក្នុងរយៈ10ឆ្នាំអញ្ចឹងយើងក៏លើកយកអាហ្នឹងវិញថាត្រូវយើងបង្កើនឲ្យបានប៉ុណ្ណឹងវិញអាបាត់ហ្នឹងធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យបានវិញប៉ុន្តែក្នុងការសិក្សាជាក់ស្ដែងរបស់យើងវាបានច្រើនជាងអ្វីដែលយើង set ហ្នឹងទៅទៀតនេះតួលេខយើងនេះគឺថាយើងសម្រេចបាននៅក្នុងលក្ខខណ្ឌនៃការអនុវត្តកសិកម្មអភិរក្សបាទនឹងពលរដ្ឋកម្មរដ្ឋភាពនេះយើងសម្រេចបាន 0.63 ទៅ 0.8% ខ្ពស់ជាង target របស់អន្តរជាតិ for per meal នឹងទៀតដែលដុកទ័ររ៉េមីគាត់បង្ហាញវិញគេឲ្យយើងតែបានត្រឹម 0.4 គេសប្បាយប៉ុន្តែយើងឲ្យតែដាក់ CA នឹងចូលទៅ 0.6 0.8 អា 0.1 នោះគឺនៅលើដីដែលមានជីជាតិទាបដីទំនាបដូចដីពួក agrisol ហ្នឹងអា 0.8 គឺដីក្លេបាទដីដែលមានដីល្អចុះដូចវាដីក្រហមអីនៅយើងឃើញណាដីក្រហមអីណាបាទគឺអាហ្នឹងវាបាន 0.8 បាទអាហ្នឹងគឺគិតក្នុងរយៈពេលកំណត់មួយបាទអញ្ចឹងដោយសារអានេះគឺអត់ទាន់ទូទៅនៅឡើយការ apply បច្ចេកទេស CA នេះបើមិនយើងដាក់អាហ្នឹងឲ្យបានច្រើននៅក្នុងដីកសិកម្មប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងហើយយើងអាចបានរួមចំណែកច្រើនបាទប៉ុន្តែជាការប្រឈមទាំងអស់នេះជា challenge តែយើងត្រូវធ្វើម៉េចដើម្បីឲ្យដីជាច្រើននៅកសិកម្មយើងហ្នឹងទទួលបានការអនុវត្តនេះហើយទី4 target ទី4 2030ពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹង ecosystem service បាទអានេះក៏ពាក់ព័ន្ធរឿង protected area បាទគឺមិនរក្សានៅសេវាកម្មបរិស្ថានបាទដើម្បីកសិ ecology របស់យើងអញ្ចឹងយើងមើលស្ថានភាពត្រឹមឆ្នាំ2020យើងមាន protected area នេះ 7.2 លានហិកតាបាទ 7.2 លានហិកតាបាទទោះបីយើងធ្លាក់ចុះមកក៏ដោយប៉ុន្តែយើងរក្សាបានហ្នឹងគឺតួលេខរបស់ក្រសួងបរិស្ថានត្រឹមឆ្នាំ2020ណាអញ្ចឹងយើងមាន protected area ប៉ុណ្ណឹងបាទតមកទៀតរាជរដ្ឋាភិបាលមានគោលនយោបាយដែលខ្ញុំបានជម្រាបជូនវិញយុទ្ធសាស្ត្រឥឡូវនេះមកដល់កម្រិតយើងធ្វើបាទកម្រិតធ្វើនេះខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណក្នុងការ bằng hai chú ní cứ miền đại cu và anh vọt vào dương cứ Dr. Florent này chia đầm nang đầm nang CIRAD nó không có thể cảm chia dư miền Mr. Đại Trương Pradan và thằng Swisscontact và cứ xã ca kia chúng tôi kẹt cả sự cam để miền dụ than cục rong thông tin đấy cả sự cam đấy vừa càng nhiều nè và cái càng nhiềuนี้bị chọc đau đầm nang ca khóc kia chúng tôi ca châu luôn bỏ Swisscontact và này chọc đau là 4 cứ thằng CIRAD bỏ AFD và CIRAD bỏ AFD quật châu mất năm 2004 và cho nó thêm đâu chia sàn CARDI lại đi và cái thừa hướng DMC mà đâu đưa của su nữa ấy đó và DMC Direct Mount Based Cropping System mà nên là ca năm đối miên cầm rô bạn này máu sao bạn này là miên cầm rô chắc kiện con tay không biết luôn DMC đó việc on môi on hoàn ha cái first man năm sầm nát sao năm nát nói với kimi chắc cái bảo hướng sầm nào bảo viên dùng mấy từng ngày một đấy cả scam ảo đấy đây là bay trong cục luôn đó cứ việc các campaign ha đấy campaign ha cầm nói nữa là herbicide resistant with species giống thôi mình ca đồng bạc giống khỏi của mỗi cái mình chặt sạch xem xét giống ấp ở năm mọi thứ ấy sầm lát con tới khi mình chạy cái trường hao thác cover green cover rồi có thưa ca đâm tầm năm một lúc đấy hết dừng cặp mình mà xin mẹ dừng cặp lục về đó mình ở năm sầm lát vậy đó mà chẳng như chùm hiên đi tăng bị pipon buôn mà là hốt hay dừng còn to cái đi nó hốt mà đo lớn đó càng như cả scam áp đệm vào cái đi hay miền đại cu châu luôn hố hai dùm to miền khang ADC để support miền USAID và support USAID ní cứ miền Sisan nó càng thổi Dr. học lý đá và còn mới chặt tục đã nè và cứ quạt chui nó không tùm rung nó không crop khăn thì cả thua tùm đá ruộng kia nó muối bà cô đá cứ xong lại ban đâu cả sẽ ecology nó để cảm chế là như hai tháng agroecological transition hoặc Cambodia chấm như thứ ca luôn thì bạn nó hay tầm nào tới ní cứ có miền ca control dạng khăng bị nạn nòm bảo có xuống cả scam và nạn nòm bảo xuống cả scam mà ai đóng rộng tây ai đóng rộng lịch hà nụ rộng lịch hà đụng tiêu nó là việc con control hai miền khang thiết kế việc con đôi ai đóng sọc xì lô lục tầm nàng khang trong bức sang what cả scam bằng chuẩn bọn bà lúc có châu luôn control scam bà hay miền khang còn rạ xuông mà chúng luôn đại con châu luôn nó không cọp khăn ca sĩ tiếp ba cứ trong ba cứ miền ca cứ trẻ hà vậy ní cứ dương rung đến ní cứ dương sầm lại bán cụ đào bỏ xương và ca nghi bỏ dương nó không ní và research enabling environment ní ba thà dương miền tầm nặng ca này ca thử bỏ dương đó và cứ đi muối cứ dương thôi ca estimate bà này dương sắp xa pi carbon storage và bạn mang xa thiệt carbon nó đấy hết tao vì ai miền benefit đây là và anh này mới đại dương của vùng này sắp xa đấy hơi dương miền chuẩn bị ca vì giờ khoai dương như thằng sông tố giống như bị brang và miền ca brang lục màu chuối thôi ca tam vậy rồi xì làm sẽ ấy mùi xạ ca mùi dụ than của con tuần này cả scam đấyคือdương thôi ca nghe đó và hay dương pra mà sim và sầm rạp bọc về nó kháng cáo miền hao infra spectroscopy nóคือnó xin nó tầm mấy dương ở vô sầm nạp đây máu việt là tao miền carbonประมาณพี่rồi nó không đây đó đưa không đây là vô máu pi và còn là cam cả scam không học gì mà nó mùi và hay màu tiền máu cứ dương sắp xa lắm hay dương bằng cát nữ ca nó vọt mũi đây miền lệ nặng đi làm đặc hiểm adaptable management practice ní và cứ tôi chữa dương thơ cả scam bẻ ní ấy mà dương cả scam bẻ như vọt nó không system được chưa right base system nó đồng nam horticulture mà đồng nam chiều phái mà hay còn nó đồng nam đâu chạm đâu mình luôn được chụp bút cả lồng đi mà phải dương nó vọt nó không system không như này mà đây dương có miền ca vùng rừng màสมัครភាពnày càng như sao chiêu nâng trong này đăng cả rung ấy này và được nông càng như xã càng ở dưới hay là hỗ trợ đó cá sẵn tình cô dụ bài và đồng ý chui control năng lực công phu ការអនុវត្តនេះធ្វើយ៉ាងម៉េចឲ្យមាន impact នៅក្នុងក្រៅបាទអញ្ចឹងហើយនឹងទី4បាទ exploring ecosystem carbon ecosystem survey នេះគឺអានេះគឺយើងមានគំនិតរួមដូចដើមមួយទៀតបាទដើម្បីដូចថាយើងធ្លាប់លើថា carbon credit បាទយើងទទួលបានត្រូវបានអនុវត្តសម្រាប់គម្របព្រៃឈើប៉ុន្តែតើសម្រាប់កសិកម្មយើងគួរតែគិតយើងគួរតែមានកបោននឹងគេដែរអត់បើយើងធ្វើការងារល្អដែរបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងដូចដើមគំនិតនឹងមួយទៀតបាទសួរថាជួនណាយើងអាចគិតថាធ្វើមិនបានធ្វើមិនកើតប៉ុន្តែបើយើងអត់ធ្វើវា nothing to prove បើយើងធ្វើយើងដឹងថាអូអានេះធ្វើអត់កើតទេប៉ុន្តែបើយើងមិនទាន់ធ្វើយើងថាធ្វើអត់កើតអាហ្នឹងក៏នៅតែ question រហូតអញ្ចឹងយើងធ្វើឥឡូវចេញដំណើរខ្មែរជាមួយខាង CIRAD ថាមាន AFD គាត់ AFD EU គាត់គ្រប់គ្រងក្នុងគំនិតដូចដើមនេះយើងធ្វើគ្នាជាមួយ CIRAD មួយ Swisscontact គឺចូលរួមគ្នាធ្វើបាទ support ការងារនេះ initiative នេះបាទតិចខ្ញុំបង្ហាញពី initiative ហ្នឹងណាបាទយើងនឹងសាកមើលថាតើកសិកម្មយើងអាចទិញកបោនទិញអីគេបានលុយពីកបោនហ្នឹងគេទេបាទហ្នឹងបាទនេះការងារនេះក៏ slide ដូចខ្ញុំជំរាបមុនហ្នឹងគឺពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងការបានប្រមាណ stock បាទកបោននិង social benefit តែយើងបានធ្វើអីនេះការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្របាទការងារសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវវិភាគមើលសិនតាមរយៈការងារពិសោធន៍បាទហើយយើងនេះគឺជា paper បាទដែលយើង publish នេះលក្ខណៈវិទ្យាសាស្ត្របាទដើម្បីពិនិត្យមើលថាតើអាហ្នឹងវាអាចទៅរួចឬយ៉ាងម៉េច stock កបោនរបស់យើងយ៉ាងម៉េចណាបាទតើវាមាន benefit វាមានសក្តានុពលយ៉ាងម៉េចដើម្បីទទួលផលប្រយោជន៍ពីបញ្ហា stock កបោនក្នុងដីហ្នឹងណានឹងសិក្សាជាលក្ខណៈវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រនេះបង្ហាញជា paper ដែលបាន publish បាទអានេះក៏ដូចគ្នាអានេះតួលេខនេះបង្ហាញយើងមានតួលេខដែលយើងពិសោធន៍ទៅគឺដូចជា500គីឡូក្រាមកបោនក្នុងហិកតាក្នុងមួយឆ្នាំបាទយើងមានកន្លែងខ្លះយើងបានប្រហែលជា200ជាងបាទក្នុងហិកតាក្នុងមួយឆ្នាំបាទអញ្ចឹងតាមរយៈការអនុវត្តចែកជាកសិកម្មអភិរក្សរបស់យើងណាបាទនេះដូចគ្នាបាទគឺការរឿងធ្វើ calibration បាទនៃស្រកនៃកបោនដោយប្រើ infraspectroscopy ហ្នឹងបាទហ្នឹងហើយ adaptable management practice នេះគាត់រូបបង្ហាញតែយើងធ្វើក្នុង system ផ្សេងៗគ្នាដូចខ្ញុំបានជំរាបជូនហើយអាចមានគីឡូមីអាចមានពោតអាចមានដំណាំចូលផ្លែដាំដំណាំគម្របដីហើយការងារនេះគឺវាផ្សារភ្ជាប់ជាមួយនឹង machinery បាទគ្រឿងយន្តកសិកម្មអត់មានអាហ្នឹងទេអត់ទៅរួចទេអាហ្នឹងខ្ញុំសូមបញ្ជាក់ឡើងវិញបាទហើយខាងភាគីរបស់យើងដៃគូហ្នឹងក៏បានទទួលស្គាល់ថា machinery នៅក្នុងការអនុវត្តគឺជា key សម្រាប់moving forward to our common goal GA បាទអញ្ចឹងការងារ education យើងមានបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលបាទមានគ្រូដូចជា Dr. Rémi Cardinael ហើយនិង Dr. Laurent ហ្នឹងគាត់គ្រូបាទឥឡូវគាត់ពងជួយបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលមន្ត្រីយុវដ្ឋានគ្រប់គ្រងធនធានកសិកម្មឲ្យខ្លាយជាអ្នកកបោនហ្នឹងបាទ PhD កបោនបាទគឺការងារកបោនអញ្ចឹងយើងមិនមែនថាត្រូវមកធ្វើហើយយើងបោះនេះគឺយើងផលិតធនធានមនុស្សថែមទៀតបាទហើយបើជា3 4ឆ្នាំទៀតហ្នឹងបានឥឡូវគាត់ក្នុងក្រោយបាទលោកលេងរាបាទណាគាត់កំពុងធ្វើការសិក្សាហ្នឹងបាទហើយបាទយើងក្រៅពីហ្នឹងយើងមាននៅស្ថានីយ៍បោះខ្នោរបស់យើងនៅក្នុងស្រុកចំការលើខេត្តកំពង់ចាមនេះបាទគឺជាកន្លែងសេនាធិការនៃការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវវិទ្យាសាស្ត្ររបស់ CA នេះឯងរបស់ Conservation Agriculture Sustainable Intensification នេះឯងបាទគឺនៅបោះខ្នោហ្នឹងហើយបោះខ្នោនេះគឺយើងក៏ទទួលបានការគ្រប់គ្រងពីថ្នាក់ដឹកនាំក្រសួងបាទឯកឧត្តមរដ្ឋមន្ត្រីបាទឯកឧត្តមថ្នាក់ដឹកនាំក្រសួងទាំងអស់បាទលោកគ្រប់គ្រងបាទគ្រប់គ្រងហើយមានការគ្រប់គ្រង AID បាទជាមួយខាង CIRAD ហើយនិង Swisscontact គឺយើងធ្វើផែនការបាទតម្រង់ផែនការយុទ្ធសាស្ត្រឬក៏យើងថាផែនទីបង្ហាញផ្លូវមួយសម្រាប់អភិវឌ្ឍបោះខ្នោហ្នឹងបាទសម្រាប់អភិវឌ្ឍបោះខ្នោហ្នឹងឲ្យទៅជាមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលមួយមានឧត្តមភាពខាងផ្នែកកសិកម្មអភិរក្សនិងប្រព័ន្ធវប្បកម្មនិរន្តរភាពបាទគោលវប្បកម្មយើងធ្វើហើយផែនការនេះគឺ2022ដល់2026ហើយយើងធ្វើយ៉ាងណាគឺចង់ឲ្យកន្លែងយើងនេះខ្លាយទៅជាមានកន្លែងមួយតំណាងឲ្យកសិកម្មកម្ពុជាក្នុងតំបន់មុខមាត់តំបន់បាទអញ្ចឹងសម្រាប់កម្រិតជាតិផងកម្រិតតំបន់ផង chẳng bởi sân miền ca và chung miền thập đây miền phiêu ấy bị sọc khéo mà trong mơ mới càng ngay cả scam nhưng mình mấy cứ đi con mà thấy vào mũi tới cứ một nào đó mà hay là lâu ní con ha ý cho lâu nó ọt cáo đi lâu có mưa bán nó phần nào lâu ní cứ dương miền ta scientific experiment activity nó không nặng mà trong những tàu ca vùng rít ní cứ dương tàu pe áo thiết mà pe áo thông của bạn co mà dương còn mẹ là sai xa thôi hàng kia dương thằng cứ lối mà thử những pe áo thông bạn co tiếp trong bạn là regional center này nhưng mà việc sớm nhé bạn này dương thấu Activate hết tha này đại chả nào sầm phun bao dương nông tiền mà cáiนี้คือไอ้ดอมขนาดน้องซูงมาคือลูกคอนโทรลมาหนึ่งการช่วยต่อการวัดให้ทางปอนบกเราอยู่นี่เนี่ยมาดอมนุรอยขาคือซอว่าลูกก็บ้านดังกลางนี้สมอคุณจะได้มาดอมแบบนั้นช่วยคอนโทรลนี้มาให้มีเอดียูเรานั่งขนาดนั้นช่วยยืนเทียบมาchẳng khi ông có sòng khâm một món này đấyคือdương nâng sầm lại bản tiền nó bị bòn phải mùi và anh ấy khi ông bài bạch tế mà hiểu dùng tiền hết mà anh ấy vẽ bòn là cô nón chụp xả vào dương nó cả bọt bọc nó đi trong màn đây cho nó bà trong màn đây trong bài hai indicator như thế mà cứ thấm bị bòn phải một mũi dương thừa bà đây mà tìm mũi cứ để trong bán cứ ở bọc nó là gì Center Excellence for CASI nó không bọn và regional center và nhưng thừa bàn chấp cái lỡ tới nó đi quan phải mỗi dương nó cho mà hai dương rồi thương mấy ở càng như bằng cao mà lực của vua ca bằng cao là so với thả bóng stock này mà ở slide top là nắng cũng đất ụt đau bỏ on trả chín buôn phía cònឬcó zone bị buôn phía rồi mà hai dương nâng lực của vua là thương mấy ở miền tây đây đám đỏ nắng tam dạ càng như sọc xài bị bọc nó tao nói bán của mũi con hay tá và hơi miền cả có nhiều đúng 2.7 con và trong những phương càng như cho lấy nè và dùng một tua lấy cầm đất này bị thống con tái trong việc chúng ta nông pan ca bom xuống cả scam dưới có bán miền mà ta khu nông ca một lít tây đây ăn bón cả scam à bán ở bán cả liên này ta nông trang bị con sang dập và cả liên này ta nông trang bị con sang dập trong cóนี่ก็จิบไรตุ้มุ้ยดำไปโจ้ร่วมอย่างไรở ban cả làng liên thành ta bài dương miên cầm đất ban đây trong ban nghiệp chu là trong khỏi mình cứ đầy mía và cầm đất uất đam đầy mía ní cứ cầm đất uất đam nhà dương trong tiên dương thưa dương chặt vô cả báo là đâu nòng đấy hai dương vô đô vô chỉ lui mà bình gì việc làm anh đầy mía ní trong tôi chặt vô lui mà bình thứ ba này ở dương miên phải sớ càng lang chớn kêu ghi tầm lại tất nhiên mới bán lui mà bình ấy mười thứ đang cả scam gì mới bán lui mà bình ở giá đấy bạn tại sao dương thấy miền kho bị giàu thì trai chia bỏ dương này hai bạn dương trong miền của đất Việt Nam này bạn trai chia này cứ tao bán pru hết được nhưng mà miền chu là càng như sao chứ bạn nên nói con đây cái này kho bị giàu bởi vì nó này kho bị giàu này trai chia này cứ dương agroecology practice này mà thì gọi như người ta mình trong chữ e một má nó con đây vì miền integrate nó không trai chia mới alternate về trái bán đi thang dương khác lấy tức nó không đây đang đau sợ và ní cạnh thôi cam ký mày tàn cam ký là vừa smart tiền giỏi thấy dương miền mình chỗ nó không gặp diversification nó không đi chẳng bay ní muối anh ấy miền tẹt tơ miền là chua ấu ní cửa nó CA cô ca bỏ CA còn tái dương agroecology practice ní chỗ là đi tham trường thấy việc đó nữa họ giỏi đi và họ giỏi cái họ chỉ chuyện đây mà ecosystem thôi ở đây nó miền phiêu luôn rồi vượt lắng mình thì chẳng đấy và hồ hai miền trắng và nhưng bài lại đáp tiếp bạn nào những họ giỏi bảo vì tại sao khi họ giỏi nó dương vào bậc cao là năng hay đây miền ấy cứ miền vì cô thông thống từ muối liệp trong ở miền cá bị bọt từ miền cá này từ đó agroecology này đấy và hay to mất là từ miền cao bị bọt hết ta dương thưa mấy dương đi tầm lại việc mấy tầm bay đang thang đang tàu agroecology ấy mà đấy ở đây chỉ sủng nuôi những cái thang chỉ sủng nuôi dương miền OV system mà monitoring verification and reporting system chẳng dương miền chỉ sao bao dương đang bay ra này anh cả sẽ có bất chứ ăn quá tam đang men nó còn hẹp vô rồi quát đại hơi lên cháu cái chạm là ok này ăn quá bên đây ở thế dương miền con là bay tàn đàn nhớ đấy bạn con tạm đàn dương thưa pilot nấu pi cái lấy nó khai bát bò pi cái lấy nó khai bát bò dương thưa nó được lấy để tam sử hay nó lấy để tam tận năm tận cài cho nó đi nấu rót làm đốt anh đi nấu nóng còn hot irrigation scheme và cứ pi cái lấy nó hay dương nâng và ô máu ok bạn chọn đấy bạn chẳng ní cứ dương được bàn mưa trong ngọc ní đầu tiên ngày một tiết đi bạn mưa thằng ta lại nó bị giảng mạch tại dương chọn đặt phải lót pi đó và thầy ní cứ chia là biết để tha dương chui cứ gọi ăn vọt càng gì nó giảng mạch dương chặt tay chừng mùi nâng ca chứ cả có mà hơi phải trôi trái chia vào dưới rồi còn ăn vọt thôi là dương thưa ca tạm án dương lại hỏi dương chun hoàn toàn và chắc chun hoàn việc mệnh nhá anh ấyคือdương ta anh ấy chia ca là vọt đại dương này nọ mà quan đại tha chia Agroecology practice bao nhiêu đấy câu hai cho mắt thôi anh ấy tới nó vui chưa là ca đi trong đấy vì miền bay trong đấy đại dương thử ghi tầm lại con đấy vì muối quạt chua đây à tí quạt quạt lửa đây stop khổ này tí bấy kia bằng điệp đây đã bây mà bờ sân thì quạt chua đấy từ việc tôi đang cầm đất bao nhiêu hay chẳng ăn tụi này sâu hay là sâu lưới con sâu này nhớ bờ sân quạt thưa sắp xoay linh đó thưa qua cầm lửa đây stop rừng stop khổ này việc rừng này thưa ở nước chặt tôi số tận số ấy mà bán đó thứ ba mùi tụ bán lưới thì em là đi anh ấy chia pilot bao nhiêu đấy mà anh con vua trong đấy mấy ba nó em là mấy ba đọc là kia một nghiệp đấy đó này ở đọc là tụ pì chẳng không phải ta nên tu lệnh không phải ta chẳng bây giờ mưa bây giờ lại xin cái tấu hơi và nó còn chẳng như ha nên ta dương ở rung quán quát sai $15 không mua hecta và sân con ăn vót ta này phải cho dương uống đi chớ đấy sai $15 một hecta ní khi ông lực thì họ mới tha sai $15 một hecta ủ tí ho thà dương phèn ta dương cả làng liên này ta thầu ăn vót năng không trăm pi con sam sắp cha dương thầu ca thả ca và man nhưng quả côn mới bay chứ mà pay pi liên mà pay bay liên đô la reward đó thầu đo reward là có đấy năng hai đại dương thử bởi dương thưa năng bán dương xong cái bán mà pay pi liên mà pay bay liên đô la nó chỉ lui vào mình nó để dương chẳng thứ nó chắc bạn bàn tay là không hecta dương mới tí chứ bàn tay bờ sân dịp cả liên hecta cho lưu lang đó mà liên hecta mà nó anh này chia cho nói đại dương nhưng còn là kịch mưa và hỏi kịch mưa là cả liên hecta với lũy bay dương pay bay liên đô la và bữa ăn vào tam tập này bà chẳng pay bay liên đô la dương ban làm đó cứ xong ôi bật tê vót nó để quạt trong ở dương ta lại thở đã vót agroecology nâng đã bay chui pan đây chui cặn thôi cam phê man tem chọn có nói mình cân nào này quạt miền núi chạm ao dưới lại trong thứ này ao dưới ok con trai và đây đi cứ mà trong nói mình quản lực tí lái bàn tay đi còn nào với đây dễ ông tí ao khám rồi bỏ đây mình thằng tê bà cứ ao khám cứ song khăn cứ dương chọn ban từ đó ca đẹp thuần thiên đấy cả scam bao nhiêu nó ôi nông ca bị bọt mũi từ đó các sĩ cầu gì mà đây tha vì mình này răn rạp hiệp này tại tháng mà mình sầu rạp hiệp đèn mà đúng và đèn tại thàn và từ hai đồng miền thọ trong này sẽ cảnh như là dương trong mà xong bạn xong ở cồn trán hay ní cứ chỉ cả thay nó cồn trai vào dụ than công thuần để cả scam mình trai cả team và ông ca CIRAD ông ca subcommittee ấy mỗi ní cứ miền nẹt nâu bị coi nó thông tiết bà nên trong này nó có nông đất bằng hai bằng trong miền EU và miền USAID và CISEN miền và càng như mà trong luôn và dương miền là ông ca EU với quạt châu luôn đấy còn ông ca như support này agricultural innovation này đang mà cứ partner châu luôn ở đằng đi cứ bờ ở miền ca control bình hàng kỳ nặng nòm bỏ dùng cả cam khám mạnh sát dương có tàu đuổi này bà trong những bạn xong họ cùng tràn nếu bà nhầm xong chọn
Thank you, Dr. SENG Vang, for your good presentation. It takes a little bit of time, but very interesting. And I hope that some of our developing partners may know about some action that been taken by various organizations, especially the public institution, private sector, development partner, and as well as the farmer as well. For the next presenter, I would like to introduce the Mrs. Niina Kylliainen. Sorry, maybe my spelling is wrong. She is the climate change policy specialist with over 10 years of experience in the international development and in the region, Timor-Leste, Laos, and Pakistan, who worked at the Cambodian Climate Change Alliance UNDP. In recent years, she has been providing technical support in strengthening the climate action in Cambodia, especially in terms of the development of NDC update and the long-term strategy for carbon neutrality. Niina specializes in helping the country to deliver on their climate commitment under the UNFCCC, including setting up monitoring and evaluation and MOV frameworks. She is a strong belief in data-driven processes that support decision-making based on actual data and strengthen the development processes toward a resilient and carbon neutral society. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Niina, and I would like to invite her to give the presentation on long-term strategy for carbon neutrality. So, Mrs. Niina, the floor is yours now. So you have 30 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, better? Yeah, so thank you for inviting me here today. It's my pleasure. And yeah, as I mentioned already, so I'm not no kind of agriculture expert. So we are not going into the details in the agriculture sector, unfortunately, but I'm giving an overview in terms of the long-term strategy that was just submitted to the UNFCCC. But first, we are going to do the background a bit. Cambodia has made a good progress in terms of climate change policy, and this includes, for instance, Cambodia climate change strategic plan. Cambodia has submitted 2 NDCs, the first NDC in 2015, and then also updated NDC in 2020. Cambodia's biennial updated report, which is the latest inventory report, was submitted in 2020, and the third national communication that also includes the inventory report on the adaptation side will be submitted soon, so the work is underway. Cambodia has also set up national monitoring and evaluation framework, and also regular climate public expenditure reviews are undertaken annually. In terms of the recent policy developments, so Cambodia in October 21 announced that no new coal power plants will be approved, and also the solar capacity has been increased after that. There are 2 very important documents coming this year. And the first one is a national energy efficiency policy, and the second one is power development plan. Cambodia is also, there is going to be one presentation here today also regarding the carbon finance. So Cambodia is preparing itself for the carbon finance, and also this is under the Article 6 and Paris Agreement. And these are the key timelines under UNFCCC negotiations. So how to reach the 2050 goal. So as you can see here, the picture is a bit blurry, but yes, next time the NDC will be updated in 2025 and then 2030 and up to 2050, so that when all of the countries should be carbon neutral. In terms of Cambodia, so the latest inventory, yes, it was this BWAR report. It has 2016 data, and it was submitted in 2020. Then we have the updated NDC, and then the latest, the long-term strategy. And actually, Cambodia was first ASEAN to submit long-term strategy with the 2050 target, and the second least developed country to submit long-term strategy with any kind of target. So good, well done, Cambodia. Then a little reminder on the 2030 NDC scenario. So you probably remember that the NDC was submitted in 2020, and there was the emission reduction target at 42% compared to the business's usual scenario. And here you can see a little bit the sectors, etc. But basically, by 2030, Cambodia is committed to reduce 42%. Then about the long-term strategy development, well, how it was done and what really happened last year in terms of it. So the Prime Minister first announced in December 2020 that Cambodia would submit this long-term strategy in 2021. And the progress was led by NCSD. And the consultations were done mostly with the main key sector ministries, and 2 consultations through the Climate Change Technical Working Group was organized. The long-term strategy is following the next 10 years, the existing policies and targets. So they were mainly used for the long-term strategy. Then the period 2030-2050, some existing targets were used when it was possible. And then between 2030-2050, the targets that are not, there were no existing policies that we were able to follow. And then there was the consultations organized and assumptions formulated. And this was supported by UNDP, FAO, AFD, GDGI, World Bank, etc. team. And then no objections were received from the ministries who were involved in all of these commitments that were made for the time period 2030-2050. Here you can see now very overall list of key targets that we have in the long-term strategy. Of course, all of these, they have more background, everything in the document, and you can find the document. It's on UNFCCC's registry, so go and visit. You can then find more information. But in terms of the agriculture, for instance, the focus is on rice, less methane, direct seeding practices, wetting, drying practices, etc. In terms of the follow sector, so stopping deforestation is the main main action, and that is also in terms of the entire long-term strategy very important target. Also, agroforestry, commercial tree plantations are mentioned there. In the energy sector, so increasing the renewable energy share, that's and also the energy efficiency measures. Those are the main actions. And then, of course, this no-coal generation is one of the main commitments in the energy sector. In the transport, we have public transportation and also the e-vehicles in the motorcycles, cars, buses, etc. By 2050 targets. Then in the industrial processes, carbon capture, storage, for instance, is one of the targets, commitments. And then in the waste sector, reducing open burning and expanding waste collection coverage to 85% in 2050. Here you can then also see how are we trying to reach the zero with all of these key sectors. So here you can see that they are still in 2050. Agriculture is the second biggest emitter, and forestry follow sector is the one that is providing the sink to the other sectors also to be able to reach the zero. In terms of the finance, so we also calculated the finance side of the long-term strategy. So here you can see that the private capital expenditures will increase, and in 2050, around 2/3 should be from the private capital expenditures. In terms of the cost-benefit analysis that were made, we have the MAC curve here, and you can see in the beginning it's very small. You can probably see, but they are like the actions that are most cost effective, and most of those actions are related to renewable energy, for instance, energy sector. And then at the end of the curve, those are the actions that in terms of cost benefits are more difficult, and we have the agricultural land forestry related actions over there, and so they need more support, and especially in terms of the private sector engagement. Here are also some numbers related to the additional GDP growth, adaptation co-benefits, and job creation through the 2050 carbon neutrality. Cambodia is also currently setting up the enhanced transparency framework that is under UNFCCC processes, and all of the countries are also requested to create their own system, how they are going to transparently report these commitments to UNFCCC. So Cambodia has already set up NDC tracking system, which is an online-based system, and it provides all of the information regarding the NDC actions, and it is annually tracked by the ministries. So we had 60 ministries who were involved in the NDC development. And now, currently, we are also including the long-term strategy targets into the NDC tracking system. So soon, like next month, when the ministries log into the system, they will also see the long-term targets there. And the NDC, as I mentioned earlier, so the NDC is basically the commitment up to 2030, and then after that, the long-term strategy will cover up to 2050, so they are in line. And so also in the NDC tracking system, which will be called climate action tracking system probably soon. So we will also then have the long-term targets there and the tracking related to those indicators. In terms of the next steps, so we are currently developing the long-term strategy implementation plan, and that will then guide the sectoral implementation of the long-term strategy. It will take into account the NDC commitments also. This is all one package basically. And then also the long-term strategy implementation will be enhanced by setting up this national framework, how to report, what kind of information, what is actually happening in terms of these commitments. The data gaps will be addressed, and the sectoral capacity, the main key sectors will receive capacity support to be able to know where are they currently in terms of these commitments. Also the financial mechanisms, I mentioned the carbon financing, etc. These kind of systems currently are underway, and also we have understood the private sector engagement, like the need for private sector engagement, and especially through the public-private partnerships, so that will also be strengthened later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Niina, for a good presentation and very interesting to learn from the long-term strategy for carbon neutrality. Especially, we learn about the NDC. I think from the presentation, very useful for the some of the activity like the Dr. SENG Vang just presented about the golden soil. We call it daimir. That we are trying to introduce the carbon financing, and from your experience that we could get the some support and contribution from you and your team, that we can materialize soon, that we are the one who could provide a strong evidence enough for the carbon financing in the future as well. So next the presentation, I would like to introduce the Dr. Laurent Thuriès. Is a soil scientist at CIRAD with 25 years of international experience in the field of organic fertilizer and soil health. His work aims at the fostering the circular economy and reduce dependency on mineral fertilizer, as well as contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission during the production, transport, and application of mineral fertilizer. His research work has provide valuable insight and experience in alternative fertilizer application for improved carbon stock, reduced greenhouse gas emission, and better nutrition uptake. He has also contributed to the development of simple models to be used by farmers and agronomists to choose suitable agricultural input for their production. This has helped to guide farmers in their agricultural management and support their decision-making system while improving understanding, awareness, and uptake of organic and other alternative fertilizing products. He has therefore been directly involved in supporting farmers to transition from chemical-based to organic farming. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Laurent, and I would like to invite him to give the presentation on status of greenhouse gas emission and case study from La Réunion Island. So, Dr. Laurent, the floor is yours now, and you have 30 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for the invitation. And why should we still make, again, consistent efforts? It's a very good question. According to recently summary for policymakers, you know well, I think, but the humankind is tightly linked to the climate change and to the environment consequences on. And we have a common goal in reducing the climate risk because it's a matter of humankind survival. If we have a look at who emits by sector, on a global scale, the agriculture, forestry, and other land uses represent more or less a quarter of the total global greenhouse gas emission. And if we have a look more precisely on the Cambodian local emission, FOLU represents more or less 80% of the global greenhouse gas emission. So you easily see there that we have on a global scale or local scale, we have to put again some efforts in order to reduce tremendously the impact of the greenhouse gas emissions. And if we have a simple look at the strategy we have to face, we can, on the first step, decrease the sources, let's say the greenhouse gas emission, and we intend to move from the present situation to the near future one with decreasing the emission. And on the other hand, the next strategy is to increase the sinks. So decreasing the source and increasing the sinks. Let's say the carbon storage, as Dr. Rémi has presented previously. So, for example, increasing the soil organic stocks and also avoiding the soil carbon mineralization on the other side. There are several levels in order to achieve these strategies on both sides. First of all, we can tend to increase the primary production. Let's say, for example, with the cover crops, you know very well here. So, tend to increase the biomass return to soil, both from the ground and on the above the ground biomass. So, we can import exogenous residues, organic residues like manures, compost, and other organic fertilizer, for example. Avoiding another big source of emission, the fires. Intending to better manage all the grassland by better fertilization and improved rotation of the grazing on the plots. Another intention is to decrease the biodegradation and the mineralization rate from soil. Let's say, for example, by adopting a no-tillage strategy and better manage the water input in soil. And above all, as it's shown here, in a local situation, is decrease the erosion rate because the soil is a finite resource. It's non-renewable resource. So when you're losing soil, you're losing all the capital you have invested on previously. It's very important. So we have talked about of carbon, soil carbon, and so on, but there are also very important sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And if you have a look at the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission, you easily see that there's not only CO2, but also methane and nitrous oxide. And due to their different global warming potential, when you have little amounts of methane emitted or nitrous oxide emitted, in CO2 equivalent, it should represent huge amounts. So when you make the comparison between what is emitted, I represented here the respective amount of greenhouse gases emitted by the two sectors, therefore you and the other sectors. You see on a global scale, but CO2 is more or less 13% due to the FOU. Methane is 44%. It's huge. And for the nitrous oxide, it represents more or less 80% of the greenhouse gas emitted due to agriculture, forestry, and other land use. So you easily see that the main effort we have to do is on not only CO2, but also on the other two main greenhouse gas emitters. Methane, you know, that mainly emitted through livestock and paddy rice. And for the N2O, is mainly due to the production and the utilization of fertilizer. So among the many actions we have to have in mind, we both have to consider carbon and the other type of greenhouse gases. And here you have what is very simple, a simple goal. We have to sequestrate, store carbon, but when we consider the other type of gases, we have to be aware about their global warming potential. So even if you have very good intention, carbon-related good intention, in some particular situation, you can also have other gases that could cancel completely the effort you have made previously. So it's all a matter of balance between the action put on the carbon and the other. Now, I will present you two concrete examples of what have been done on different situations regarding climate change mitigation strategy. The first example is where I was posted recently in Réunion Island in the Indian Ocean. It was the organic fertilization with different kind of organic waste for the nutrient recycling on sugarcane fields. And another example come from the Dr. Rémi in Zimbabwe with conservation agriculture. I think you know much more maybe on organic fertilization here. And why we intend to use organic fertilizer as substitutes to mineral fertilizer. You all know here the reported price of our mineral fertilizer. You can see that in 2008, big crisis, COVID crisis, and so on. And now in 2022, the Ukraine crisis war. So mineral fertilizer price depend broadly on this different kind of crisis, the global demand, obviously, and geopolitical tension, energy costs, because they are tightly linked to the production of mineral, let's say, for example, mineral nitrogen fertilizer. And we have to have in mind the end of stock prediction. And on a local point of view, you know, I think, but the prices are completely soaring in early 2022. And here, a bag of urea costs almost $50. So it represents a very huge amount for the local farmers. And also, why we intend to use this type of organic fertilizer, because it's a bit complicated, a bit difficult, because it's a total part of the circular economy. When you use local produce raw materials, you transform the raw materials locally, you don't have to transport the fertilizer on a very large amount of kilometers. So you spend lots of fuel and a lot of money. You reduce also the volume to be treated or eliminated in landfills, for example. So it's another advantage. You recycle the nitrogen content in the different type of waste. So it's a loop. You have a lesser dependency on the global NPK market also. And also it's an alternative. We don't have in mind but near end of stock resources. For example, for less than 1 century, the resource available will be completely exhausted. So we will face in the near future, let's say our grandson, we are facing a struggle to the access of this kind of nutrient. So recycling organic waste is a solution among the diverse solution in order to access this type of resource. So also different advantages in order to use this type of fertilizer, avoiding the gases emitted during the production, the transportation, utilization, spreading of mineral fertilization. And also a positive side effect, using organic material as organic fertilizer. You combine the two actions, putting nutrient and you putting carbon in soil. So it's potentially a good solution to promote soil health also. Well, you see they are facing different kind of stakes also. The example I want to illustrate is the organic fertilizer promotion in Réunion Island on sugarcane monocropping with the reference fertilizer, urea, and the main two organic fertilizers used abroad is pig liquid manure and pelleted Swiss sludge, dried lime and so on. So in our team, our research efforts are dedicated to the environmental risk implied by using this type of fertilizer, and also intend to make the balance between the risks and the improvement of soil health. So obviously, we are dealing with soil organic stocks, and on the other side, the so the sinks and the sources, the greenhouse gases emitted. Where are the sources? The sources are there. The organic nitrogen are transformed by the microbial biomass into diverse sort of mineral nitrogen species, ammonium, nitrates. And during each step, you can have losses. It's a pity, but it's like it is. So you can have indirect and direct emissions. There are lots of leaks. It's nature. Direct. The ammonia volatilized can be transformed afterwards in N2O also. So there are very diverse sources of greenhouse gases emitted. And how we manage to catch the greenhouse gases emitted with a simple method. It's quite an old one. You see, you put a closed chamber on soil and you regularly measure the gases emitted. You have to check also some special drivers of the emission, because the emission depends on temperature, the moisture of the soil, and so on. So if we have a closer look to the greenhouse gases emitted, here with a fixed amount of sugar cane straw, I think it was 10 tons of dry matter per hectare. Okay. We have did with 2 doses of liquid manure and one multiplied per 10. And if we have a look, you can see with the huge amount of liquid manure applied, you have tremendous N2O emitted on a very short period of time. And if we make a schematic figure, oops, we can see that the greenhouse gases emitted are linked very tightly to the mineral nitrogen content in the topsoil, the moisture, let's say the water feed pore space in soil. And you can see that the greenhouse gases emitted on the example here is N2O, depend on the different steps during the transformation of nitrogen in soil. Let's say here, during the intensification, so the method we have is to consider both the N quantity and the condition on the soil. So we have to manage also the irrigation and the moisture stature of the soil. We all of this. And on the other side, we finish closely. If you have the same amount of straw, but different kind of fertilizer with the same amount of nitrogen. It's not so clear, but here you see the liquid manure emitted with N2O emission. In purple is the lime sewage sludge, pelleted sewage sludge. You can see that sewage sludge pellets emitted a very low amounts of N2O because the nitrogen is on the organic form. Green, the urea, low amounts, and the emission are measured on a longer period of time than liquid manure. So if we have a schematic figure, you can see that the different types of fertilizer and physical states are completely different. Solid one versus liquid one. So solid are urea and pelleted sludge, and the liquid one is a liquid manure. You have completely different behaviors because of the organic nitrogen content in the different types of fertilizer. And in the reverse, you have lesser mineral nitrogen in the other. And that implies a lower accessibility, availability for the decomposer, the micro level decomposer in soil. So you have a completely different behavior measured by the N2O emissions. So the quality of the nitrogen matters also, not only the conditions. Let me finish my speak by the other example with the conservation and agriculture in Zimbabwe with Dr. Rémi. Now it's based on a big thesis on soil carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emission under conservation agriculture. It's based on a long-term experiment on 2 types of soil and with rotation, maize and copy, and with different type of agricultural practices, including no tillage. We use the same, more or less, kind of chambers in order to catch the greenhouse gases emitted. And here, like in Réunion Island, soil moisture, soil mineral nitrogen content in soil and so on are necessary to assess in order to make the relationship between the stocks and the greenhouse gases emitted. So it's a bit difficult, but we'll explain you simply, I hope so. You can see here a huge variability of the greenhouse gases emitted in the row, in the interrow of maize, depending on the different agricultural practices, no tillage and conventional tillage and so on. Then the greenhouse gases emission variability is due to the location between row and interrow, the treatments, and the fertilization events, the first one and the top dressing afterwards. And as it was the case in Réunion, Zimbabwe, also the emission depend on the water feed pore space, let's say the moisture in soil, the space occupied by water in soil pore. And also the emissions are linked to the mineral nitrogen stock. If you have no stocks, you have no greenhouse gas emitted. If you have a new stock, you may measure higher greenhouse gases emitted. So again, the quality of the nitrogen inputs are very important to deal with. The quantity matters, obviously. If you put a lot of nitrogen, your risks are higher. And the soil conditions, the moisture, the soil nitrogen content in the upper layer of the soil matters also. So you have to think about it when you manage your agricultural lands. So here, I synthesize in some basic take-home messages. The greenhouse gases emission depend on something we are completely dependent, the weather. Till now, we have nothing to do with the rains, temperature, and so on. But we are on the other part of the situation. We have also some actionable drivers. We can put effort, especially on the soil condition, let's say the management of the moisture with irrigation and so on. So doses, both in quantity and in quality, the nature of the nitrogen, the quality of the nitrogen, the physical state of the fertilizer remain, and the moment when fertilizer are input in soil. The aim is to combine the offer by the fertilizer and the demand by the plant in order to avoid leakage and spoiling of money and the fertilizer. Also, the emission, depending on actionable drivers like the different type of crops used and the amount of residues that are left on the soil or in the deep soil, let's say the roots. And my last slide is about the great work we are doing right now and in the next years with Mr. DALRM. I'm very honored to take part on his PhD thesis as a director. And, he will work on the impact of organic carbon index and the emission in the system here in Cambodia. In the station, you all know very well, the both know Conservation and Agriculture Station. With 4 treatments, we are intended to put our main efforts on, let's say, cassava, on the conventional tillage system, and on improved systems with no-till and cover crops and so on. So we'll have a look on the carbon quantity. We will follow the fluxes of carbon, and we'll manage to measure the carbon stocks evolution between 2011 and 2021 in order to check if the carbon stocks are evolving in the right size or not. Other concern is the quality of the carbon. As Dr. Rémi has explained, it's a main concern. We have to check if the carbon which may be stored in soil will remain on a longer term period of time or not, in order to see if the efforts we've made are profitable or not. And the last part will be the opposite side of the situation, the things and the sources. We'll check the greenhouse gas emitted in this different kind of situation with the same method we have already told. So I'm very honored to be here, and I thank you very much for your attention.
A lot about how we could come up with different application or alternative for fertilizer application for improve the carbon stock. Not only we depend on the chemical fertilizer. Very and based on your experience in Zimbabwe, it's also very good example for us for considering in Cambodia as well. More than that, you also sang for your providing the good the topic for the Mr. Vira for his the future PhD candidate on the impact of the tillage system on soil organic dynamic and greenhouse gas emission under the cassava based crop in Cambodia as well. So for the next presentation, we have the online presentation. So we have the Mr. Stephan Gill is the senior officer in the Global Green Grow Institute Carbon Pricing Unit. In this role, he managed the mobilizing agricultural trading structures program. The program aimed to support host country to access carbon finance and agricultural of the Paris Agreement. To do so, the program support countries to put in place governance framework required to trade under Article 6 and will facilitate actually transaction for internationally transferred mitigation outcome. Stephan previously worked as the management consultant for KPMG in London, providing advisory services to organizations across the banking, consumer goods, and energy sector. So welcome to the Mr. Stephan, and I would like to invite him to give the online presentation on regular framework for the implementation of the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I hope you can hear me well. I appreciate I am the only virtual presenter today. I am presenting on behalf of my colleague Theo Shand, who is also running a workshop this afternoon in about an hour, going into more detail actually about this particular topic. So I understand some people may be attending both workshops. But excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be part of this workshop. The role of soil carbon in climate change mitigation is deservedly becoming more prominent, and I've learned a lot today. Thank you. I'm going to speak to you today about Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which has great potential to stimulate financial flows towards mitigation projects in Cambodia. I've seen carbon trading and Article 6 mentioned a couple of times in the presentation so far, which is great. So I hope to provide a little bit more information about what is Article 6 and where the opportunities are, and also what is happening in Cambodia in this respect. First of all, I'm dialing in from Seoul in Korea, GGGI's headquarters. GGGI, for those who don't know, is the Global Green Growth Institute, an intergovernmental organization. We have 43 member states, including Cambodia, I believe was a founding member. And we support our member country governments with particularly policy and investment advice on green growth. We've been working in Cambodia for a number of years now on a number of areas. I think Niina mentioned earlier, we've been supporting on part of the NDC development, particularly around the industrial sector, I believe. But we also do work, for example, on waste management, e-mobility. We've been working with the garment sector on energy efficiency measures, that kind of work. GGGI is a world leader in Article 6 support. So at the moment, we support 10 countries around the world, with 2 more coming on board soon. You'll see that in addition to the work that we do in Cambodia, we're also working with your neighbor countries in Thailand and in Vietnam. We have 3 main programs. And the structure of the programs is a little bit different in each case, but the fundamental approach is very similar in that we support host or our partner governments to understand the opportunities and the risks associated with Article 6 trading, help them set up governance frameworks to enable trading to happen, and also design transactions, so first transactions under Article 6. Okay, let me first introduce a little bit about what is Article 6. This may be very familiar to many people, but I think it's worth talking a little bit about the history. So in 1992, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was established, focused on stabilization of greenhouse gas emissions. The Kyoto Protocol was adopted in 1997, and a feature of the Kyoto Protocol was that only what was termed Annex 1 countries, i.e. countries with an industrial base, had GHG reduction targets. Non-Annex 1 countries didn't have any such targets. And there were 2 what we call cooperation mechanisms established under the Kyoto Protocol, and you may be familiar with these. The first is the CDM, or the Clean Development Mechanism, and the second was joint implementation, which was between Annex 1 countries. And the idea is that cooperation enabled countries to essentially trade emissions reductions between each other, to achieve their targets. The Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, but it's fundamentally different from the Kyoto Protocol. It took a bottom-up approach to target setting through what is called the NDCs, the Nationally Determined Contributions, and that's been mentioned here before. And every country was expected to set their own targets from a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach, which was taken under the Kyoto Protocol. So the difference between with the Paris Agreement is that every country has emission reduction pledges, including Cambodia, and we've seen these already. And there has also been a cooperation mechanism established as well through Article 6. So Article 6, the objective of cooperation and of Article 6 is to essentially make climate change mitigation efforts cheaper on a global scale by directing investment to where mitigation is most effective. Climate change is a global problem. It doesn't matter if emissions reductions are achieved here or there, it's a global issue. Article 6 is also intended to mobilize private sector resources and capital into climate change mitigation, deliver sustainable co-benefits, and most importantly, help to increase ambition in NDC commitments globally. So to go further than the world has committed to so far. And there are three instruments under Article 6. There is Article 6.2, which enables bilateral agreements. So two countries to essentially say how they're going to cooperate, on what basis, and to trade emission reductions between them. At COP26 in Glasgow in November, you may be aware that many things were agreed related to Article 6. One of these was what's called guidance on cooperative approaches, which sets the parameters by which trading can happen under Article 6.2. The second mechanism is Article 6.4. So this is essentially the successor to the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, and it will be a central mechanism run by the UNFCCC. At COP26, the overall kind of rules and modalities and procedures and principles were agreed, but it will take a couple of years to be established. So to approve methodologies, to set up the whole governance, all of that. It's going to take a little bit of time. The third mechanism I won't talk much about, but it's Article 6.8. It relates to non-market mechanisms where there's no trade as such. And at the moment, it's not necessarily very clear exactly what that will contain. And this year, up until COP27, there will be a program of work to establish what it's going to look like. So at this moment, it's not very clear exactly what Article 6.8 can and can't be. So today, we're going to focus more on what's possible under Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. So what do we really mean by cooperation under Article 6? So let's say there is a mitigation project in Cambodia, something related to renewable energy or transport or even agriculture that leads to emissions reductions or carbon dioxide equivalent removals from the atmosphere. Well, what can happen if that happens in Cambodia? And Cambodia agrees as a country to transfer those to another country, then essentially that can stimulate a payment back into Cambodia in return for those emissions reductions. But the key thing to note about this in comparison to, let's say, what's been happening under voluntary markets or what happened under the CDM is the fact that all countries have targets and all countries now have to report to the UNFCCC. So if there are emissions reductions achieved in Cambodia and those are transferred to, I don't know, to Japan, let's say, and both countries counted those emissions reductions in their reporting to the UNFCCC, and if everything was then added up, it would look like there had been double the amount of emission reductions counted. So this is the basis on which we need to do what's called corresponding adjustments. So if emissions reductions are transferred under Article 6, Cambodia cannot use those towards their NDC targets. That's a fundamental principle of Article 6 to avoid double counting. And this has a lot of implications that I'll get into around the role of the government within Article 6. A couple of things that are important to know is what kind of emission reductions are tradable really, and there's a few kind of fundamental attributes. So the first is that they should be additional. So if these emissions reductions would happen anyway, if it's from something that is commercially viable, it was going to happen with local private finance anyway, then these are not considered to be additional. So in the absence of this trade, the emissions reductions would have happened anyway. So therefore, the trade hasn't led to any extra emission reductions. That's how you do that in practice is a little bit difficult, but that's a basic principle. For Article 6, they must be from 2021 onwards, mostly, and but I won't get into the nuance there. And co-benefits are very much stressed under Article 6. So they must support adaptation, economic diversification. There must be strong sustainable development co-benefits attached to the projects and to the emissions reductions that are being traded. So what are the benefits for a country like Cambodia? Well, in some ways it monetizes being able to trade internationally, monetizes an unused asset to enhance financial flows into the country and stimulate additional emission reductions that wouldn't have happened anyway. You can potentially blend with other types of finance. Carbon finance is a payment for results. It happens after the fact. It's not a loan, so it doesn't need to be repaid. But it could be well blended with other types of finance which help with the capital expenditure and then be repaid through a results-based payment. It can help to stimulate and develop new markets and investments by de-risking, by providing additional sources of revenue, unlocking new technologies and opportunities, facilitating market development, particularly for new technologies or new business models, to then achieve greater emissions reductions in the future through learning and through development of new value chains and so on. And it's very important that this is then aligned with climate action decisions, for example, that Niina went through earlier, to help these financial flows to accelerate NDC realization, enhance ambition, particularly, align with economic planning. So what particular sectors are strategic for Cambodia, where where new technologies are required, new sustainable technologies are required, and to embed in economic and environmental sustainable benefits within this. I mentioned earlier, this all sounds great, but I mentioned earlier that there is a risk attached to trading under Article 6. So let's say Cambodia again trades with Japan and they report to the UNFCCC. So you can see that here in this example, Cambodia is the transferring country. So they reduce, let's say 30 tons, that's an example number, 30 tons of CO2 equivalent. The BAU would have been 100, that leaves them with 70. But when they report to the UNFCCC, they can't count those 30 if they've traded them across. So they need to say that they have that 100 tons are counted within the country, whereas Japan, on the other hand, can count those 30 towards their emissions reductions. And the reason they might want to do that is because it's maybe particularly expensive in a type of sector, or the technologies aren't there for them to reduce all the way down to net zero in that sector. So what does this mean then? So that means that there is a risk associated with Article 6 trading for Cambodia, particularly in terms of its climate commitments. And this means that the government of Cambodia needs to be much more involved in authorizing and approving what sorts of projects can transfer emission reductions under Article 6 out of the country. So for example, if an activity is already commercially viable, the emissions reductions wouldn't happen anyway, they might not want to authorize that for international transfer. They might want to keep that to show achievement towards the NDC targets. But if trading emissions reductions can bring in additional finance to make a project viable, then this is a win for everybody. So I want to relate this back a little bit to soil carbon projects and accessing carbon finance. And please bear in mind that I am not a soil carbon expert, nor am I particularly familiar with soil carbon methodologies. But what I want to show here is a little bit the impact of some decisions that were made at COP26 on routes to accessing carbon finance in relation to things like the golden soil project that was mentioned earlier, or other soil related projects. And this is true for any sector. So at the heart of it, how do you measure emissions reductions from a particular project? Well, we do that using standards. Standards include methodologies and approaches and tools. And under Article 6, there are 3 options for that. The first is to develop bilateral standards between 2 countries. So an example of that in Cambodia is the joint crediting mechanism that Cambodia has entered into with Japan, where together Cambodia and Japan agree on specific methodologies, what can and can't be traded, how to set baselines, and so on. A second option would be to use independent standards. So for example, VERA or gold standard. So I am aware, for example, that gold standard released the soil organic carbon methodology in 2020. VERA has a methodology as well, but I believe it's on hold at the moment. But there are options, for example, in independent standards for generating emissions reductions, quantified emission reductions in soil. And the third option is the Article 6.4 mechanism, so the CDM successor. At this point, it's unclear what methodologies will be included, and this is a few years away anyway. So at the start, it's can we actually generate any measurable emission reductions according to some sort of standard? I wanted to mention as well, I understand Australia has been a leader in the space of carbon finance for soil methodologies. So I think that's an interesting area to look for those who, for stimulating a market in soil carbon finance. Okay, so question 1 is, do you have a standard under which you can generate verified emission reductions? Then the next question is the host country, in this case Cambodia, going to authorize it? And this is a very interesting question. And this is the big question at the moment, I would say, for most countries, which is, what should they or shouldn't they authorize? The workshop that GGGI is co-hosting starting from 1 p.m. is going to talk about exactly this question and on what basis you might want to start making these decisions. So I won't get into the details, but I will talk about the implications. So if the emissions reductions, the transfer is authorized, then potential buyers could be a country to be used for their NDC compliance. And that's kind of the example that I mentioned earlier. But interestingly, decisions at COP26 opened up Article 6 to be used for other contexts. So one that's less new is for the aviation sector and the shipping sector. Certainly the aviation sector, international aviation and shipping are kind of outside of the NDC and the inventories that countries report on. So there is a separate mechanism set up for aviation called CORSIA. So this is where airlines would buy emissions reductions to offset their emissions through that. So airlines need to buy authorized emission reductions. So that creates some demand within a market for authorized emission reductions under Article 6 beyond what countries might buy. Also, companies might want to buy authorized emission reductions. And the reason they might want to buy authorized emission reductions is because of the corresponding adjustment that I talked about, the avoidance of double counting. And we have already seen companies, big companies, multinationals say that they will only buy authorized emission reductions. They will not buy non-authorized emission reductions anymore because of this issue, and they place a greater value on these. So each of these routes, authorized emission reductions, have different sorts of buyers and different sorts of potential. But the key thing that unites them is that they need a corresponding adjustment. That means that Cambodia can't count them in their inventory. If an emission reduction is not authorized by the host country, there's still a route to be able to access carbon finance for those. So it could be an international company, but what's happening in some of the standards, for example, with gold standard, they are saying that they will not support any offsetting claims for non-authorized emission reductions. So that means if companies were to buy gold standard credits that were not authorized, gold standard would not support that company to say, we have offset an emission reduction we have not offset our emission reductions. They can only say that we've contributed to Cambodia achieving its NDC commitment. So this is important because of the value that could be placed on non-authorized emission reductions. Also, there is a potential market in Cambodia, if there are companies in Cambodia, if an ETS is ever set up, or if they want to contribute to Cambodia's NDC, they could do this way as well in a quantified way. But of course, if it's not authorized, there's no need for a corresponding adjustment. So this is a lot to take in, but I wanted to show, I suppose, the routes that can take that are available now. I heard the words voluntary market earlier, but because of what happened at COP26, it's unclear what's going to happen with the voluntary market. The better way of thinking about it now might be authorized or not authorized, and that has implications for prices and how they can be used, etc. Okay, so what does this mean for developers of soil organic carbon projects? Well, it means that if they want to have authorized emission reductions, then you need to engage with the government, and the government needs to be much more involved in several ways. So they need to authorize, and in order to be able to authorize, there needs to be some criteria and a process set up so that developers can request authorization, receive it, it can be tracked, and then later on, so that the emission reductions can be transferred out of the country, and that then the reporting is supported to the UNFCCC. Excuse me. And buyers may want assurance for authorized emission reductions that all of these responsibilities under the Paris Agreement will be fulfilled in order to have assurance that they will get non-double counted emission reductions. So that's why setting up these governance frameworks around authorization and transfer and reporting is really, really important to be able to stimulate demand and to bring in additional finance into Cambodia for mitigation projects. So what is happening in Cambodia currently? Well, we as GGGI are supporting the Department for Climate Change to get ready for Article 6. So we have been doing a lot of capacity building over the past year. And we have been supporting or informing the development of a couple of key texts, which I'll get into in a second. So what we are doing is supporting strategic decisions around what can and can't be traded. So what sort of sectors, what sort of technology types, and helping to facilitate the government to think about that, as well as we will help to set up processes for authorizations and processes for transfers, as well as the reporting to the UNFCCC. Alongside that, we are developing a project for reverse trade in order to be able to test those frameworks and lay the groundwork for future projects to go through. At the moment, the key texts that are relevant are a draft sub-decree on the management of greenhouse gas emission reduction mechanisms. So this is not specific to Article 6, but it does outline the institutional roles and responsibilities and functions for managing emission reduction projects and requests. And I believe that is going through a process of approval. And then the workshop that we are facilitating soon will help to inform a practice on the details of the procedures and processes. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate that was quite a lot of content, and I'm available for any questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stephan Gill. I think it is good to learn on the regulatory framework for the implementation of the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And from his presentation that we learned at the initial stage that there were just the action or measurement to ensure that how we could to get the to support, especially for those who are trying to cope with the greenhouse gas emission in various places in our country as well. So in the initial stage, that I hope that based on the asset project, that we at least that we had a chance to introduce and learn on the carbon the financing mechanism introduced there by Dr. SENG Vang, and we hope that based on the action as a pilot project, and we could work together. And I hope that from the presentation of the Stephan Gill and as well with the line department, line ministry as well as the Ministry of Environment, and the presentation of the Niina from her presentation, that we hope we could bring all together how we could make sure that we have the strong document to be used in the future, that we could get the carbon financing claim from the buyer as well. And I also believe CASIC will further work with the different stakeholders, especially with from the government as well, to provide some information to the high-ranking officer to consider about how the government could provide and also contribute as well to support our future the ongoing and future activity on the conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification and agroecology transformation as well. Because of the time constraint, and we have no time less, I would like to apologize for all of our presenters that we could have for time for the panel discussion. But I hope during the lunchtime, we could have a chance to meet and talk for freely for any question and answer from the presenter, and we can also keep in touch with them via the email or telegram or any the communication as you could. So please keep in touch with them. I think all of the presenters are very interesting and also very useful for us. So I would like to request all our participants to appreciate all of our presenters for providing their valuable time and give us a lot of the experiences and for this the side event of for this morning until now. So thank you for all the presenters. So please clap for all the presenters. And for the next, I would like to give the floor to the master of ceremony to proceed with the order, the arrangement. So thank you.
On behalf of the អនុរដ្ឋលេខាធិការសម្រាប់ការដឹកនាំធ្វើបទបង្ហាញជូនអង្គពិធីក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះជាកិច្ចបញ្ចប់នៃកម្មវិធីនេះខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញលោកស្រី Ophelie Bofis នាយកទីភ្នាក់ងារបារាំងដើម្បីការអភិវឌ្ឍឡើងថ្លែងសរណកថាបទកម្មវិធីសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញ
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am an honor to address the closing remarks of the event on soil, organic carbon, and greenhouse gas emission status possible pathways towards regenerative agriculture in Cambodia. I would like to thank the Cambodia Conservation Agriculture and Sustainable Intensification Consortium, the Research for Development Subcommittee that is led by the Department of Agricultural Land Resources Management from the General Directorate of Agriculture for the organization, along with the support of Swisscontact and CIRAD. Since 2004, the French Development Agency, AFD, is engaged on the side of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, the General Directorate of Rubber, the General Directorate of Agriculture in the field of conservation agriculture, and then since 2009 in agroecology. More recently, AFD, along with the European Union, support the WAT4CAM program, Water Resource Management, and the Water Resource Management and Agroecological Transition Program, the regional program called ASET, Agroecology and Safe Food System Transition in Southeast Asia. Within ASET, a specific component that is related to soil carbon and to the 4 per 1,000 initiative is funded by the French Facility for Global Environment in Cambodia, is one of the main beneficiaries of the project. We have this common history and background, and AFD is honored along with the other agencies of the French cooperation, such as CIRAD, present here today, to offer our expertise and to benefit from your trust. The pathway that you have followed is unique. You are at the forefront of this dynamic, offering to farmers and to the country alternatives to preserve soil health, to produce safer products, and a better well-being of rural communities. We had the privilege to listen to very informative presentations today that gave us an overview on the status in the country of initiatives on soil carbon, the central role of soil carbon to sustain the functionalities of the agrosystems, but also to act as a carbon sink and mitigate a significant part of the greenhouse gas emission, an overview of the long-term strategy to carbon neutrality, and the regulations for the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement on carbon markets. The presentation of Dr. Vang gave us insight on the ongoing initiatives. The investments in research for development is needed to design new practices to quantify the changes in ecosystem services and the added values of agroecology in order to feed the policy dialogue. That also means that research for development needs time and that long-term experiments should be maintained to assess those changes. AFD, through a multi-country initiative called PAMPA, invested since 2009 on cross-cutting issues on agroecology, with the first studies in different countries, including Cambodia, on soil organic carbon. Skills reinforcement and capacity building in agroecology, with the ambition to upgrade both KNOR as a national and regional center for research and training on agroecology, is of paramount importance. AFD, along with CIRAD, will pursue their support to reach the goals to have been designed on the 5-year strategic plan. This is also timely, as Cambodia can showcase its commitment to regenerative agriculture during the year of the ASEAN chairmanship. The investment of other development partners, such as USAID, SDC on higher education, providing support to the Royal University of Agriculture and to the Center of Excellence on Sustainable Agriculture, Intensification and Nutrition, is also a key element to make sustainable intensification an integral part of the agenda of the university. With these two initiatives, CARDI and CSAIN, I'm not pronouncing it well, a diversity of audience from farmers, agronomists, lecturers, researchers, and students will be covered. The presentations by Rémi Cardinael and Laurent Thuriès gave us an overview of the central role of the soil organic sea to sustain the functionalities of the agrosystems, to improve the resilience of farming systems through the co-benefits that go along an accumulation in soil carbon, the possibility to offset 20 to 35% of the greenhouse gas emissions through the accumulation of carbon into agricultural lands, but the need to take also into account the impacts of practices on all gases, CO2, CH4, and N20, and to assess also the nature and modalities of use of fertilizers, both organic and mineral, to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. Special thanks to Ms. Niina Kylliainen, who has emphasized the steps towards the long-term strategy for carbon neutrality. I think she's gone, but thanks to her. Based on the activities conducted by Conservation, Agriculture and Agroecology, the PhD studies that are ongoing, it will be interesting to enrich the long-term strategy for carbon neutrality with estimates of the potential contribution of cultivated soil as a carbon sink. The presentation of Stephan Gill brought us into another institutional level of regulations that have to be put in place to fulfill with the implementation of the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that refers to carbon market. I would like to emphasize here, and these elements were also mentioned by several speakers today, that there is a large range of co-benefits beyond soil carbon, and we have to advocate on these co-benefits that could be the best way to attract buyers, foundations to invest into agroecology. Rémi Cardinael highlighted on his presentation that soil is directly involved on 13 SDGs out of 17. You are building, all of you today, progressively the different dimensions of an agroecological transition from research for development, capacity building, and education with CARDI and CIRAD, engaging the private sector into agroecology, implementing CASIC, an extension model based on public-private partnership, starting the pilot initiative, the IMEAS, to reward farmers for the production of public goods and embedding these different initiatives under CASIC building synergies across ministries' lines. The involvement of a diversity of ministries, public agencies, research institutes, NGOs, and the private sector is a guarantee of success and underlines the key role of CASIC as coordinator of this dynamic. I would like to acknowledge the effort of all partners involved and the overall consistency that you have given to the dynamic. We will have to address continuously technical, economic, and institutional issues, but with the range of initiatives ongoing and that are implemented to feed the policy dialogue through CASIC, we can be optimistic to reach our common goal. I would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm the commitment of AFD, the French Development Agency, and the French cooperation in agroecology and related initiatives such as the 4 per 1,000 that was also highlighted in some presentations. I would also like to give my encouragement to the colleagues from the Department of Agricultural Land Resources Management, the Royal University of Agriculture, and other research teams for the studies that they conduct through masters and PhDs. Your involvement is a key step towards building capacity and above all to bring science-based evidence to CASIC and other policymakers. Finally, I would like to give a sincere note of gratitude to CASIC for their efforts to bring together different ministries, lines to advocate for agroecology and conservation agriculture. And as AFD country director, I am very honored AFD is part of this great journey with you. Thank you very much.
សូមអរគុណដល់លោកស្រី Ophelia Louise ជាថ្មីម្ដងទៀតនាងខ្ញុំសូមថ្លែងអំណរគុណនិងប្រសិទ្ធពរជ័យសេចក្តីមង្គលចម្រើនគ្រប់ប្រការជូនចំពោះគណៈអធិបតីឯកឧត្តមលោកជំទាវលោកស្រីនាយកកិត្តិយសអន្តរជាតិទាំងអស់សូមទទួលបាននូវគុណធម៌ទាំង4ប្រការគឺអាយុវណ្ណៈសុខៈពលៈកុំបីឃ្លាតឡើយនេះខ្ញុំសូមជម្រាបជូនផងដែរតាកម្មវិធីបទបង្ហាញនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះឬក៏ឯកសារពាក់ព័ន្ធរបស់ CASIC លោកអ្នកអាច scan ពី QR code ដែលក្រុមការងារបានបិទនៅក្នុងសាលប្រជុំសូមអរគុណនិងសូមគោរពអនុញ្ញាតប្រកាសរំសាយ